Sean, we're here to answer the age-old question. Why would anyone look at Patchface and see a babysitter for their 10-year-old child?
That's a hard question to answer, but either way, Child Protective Services should be involved.
There might not be an answer, like not a good one. So.
Well, it fit George's symbolic formula.
It's so bloody distracting. When you're reading it, you just sort of skip past it, ring-a-ding, clang-a-lang, whatever. But Roy Dotrice, you know, he really clangs the dang and rings the dong and all that. So it's very you get all of it. You just get the painful awkwardness of, you can really picture the guy in the room clanging the cowbell antlers. And I mean, I've dressed up like Patchface before, and it's just not, I don't know, it's not how I would dress up if I was trying to be like a nanny or a babysitter.
It feels like Alice in Wonderland, and Patchface is like Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Just a super dark version of it. Although maybe, you know, he's dressing for the job that he wants and not the job that he has.
Well, he's also sort of a reflection of Stannis himself, because Stannis is one of these foolish kings, you know, trying to win the throne. And here's Patchface dressing up like the Baratheons, but like just a comically dumb version of it. And by the time we're in book 5, he wants to lead the army into the sea and out again. So it's definitely in the way that the fool is supposed to be a spoof on the court. Like, we see a little bit of that. It's not intentional. It's like accidental, because they don't have quite the same. Like, they do have fools in Westeros, but they're not the court fools of some time periods where they're giving political commentary as people are talking like the official business. Like, we don't see Moon Boy, you know what I mean? Doing that kind of thing.
According to Cersei. Cersei thinks that Moon Boy is like a spy.
No, it's not. It's just a distraction. So hey there, friends, it's David Lightbringer, and I am joined by Sean from the YouTube channel Here with 1,000 Voices. Hello, Sean. Thanks for joining me, my friend.
No problem. It's like to be here.
Welcome to this Ultimate Character Guide. This is a new type of stream that I am doing, and my vision for this is essentially to combine 3 things, which are kind of past, present, and future. Essentially, past being their personal symbolism, their archetypal parallels, like George's mythical figures and potentially external influences that George has drawn from to fashion the characters. That's the past. That's where the character comes from. Present is obviously the psychoanalysis, putting them on the couch, breaking down what they want, all that kind of stuff while they're trying to get it. And then predictions for the future, should George ever, you know, finish the books and stuff. So that'll be both for Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. So these are the questions that we're going to try to answer. How will Stannis' battles grow? He's got a couple lined up, potentially. Who wrote the friggin' pink letter? Quinn the GM made a video about that just recently, and so it's just sort of an ever-present mystery in the fandom. How will the Shireen thing go, obviously? What will happen when Stannis and Jon, if and when they meet again? And I would parenthetical say also Mance. If Stannis meets Mance in Winterfell, that could be interesting. And then, of course, what will Stannis' ultimate fate be? So those are the things we will try to answer. And I've got some more Discord questions, getting into the weeds with some of that. And yeah. And I think that'll give us a nice combination of the views on the character. Because, Sean, let me just say this. In the past, I have, and by in the past, I mean for the last 10 years, I have mostly I've been talking about Stannis as an Azor Ahai character, Azor Ahai parallel, Night's King parallel, pretty much the whole time. But mostly I've been doing that to try to discern the truth of Azor Ahai. And some people have complained at times that makes it repetitive, which I understand. But the truth of Azor Ahai is hard to suss out, you know? But I even myself have wandered into other directions of the story. We're doing, you know, world building and historical parallels and more character analysis lately. I think you figure something out and then you can move on, right? So what we're gonna do with these character streams, we're gonna think about Stannis as an Azor Ahai character to find out about Stannis. Because all of these people that parallel Azor Ahai, they're not all the same. They're not the same type of Azor Ahai. In a way, Azor Ahai is just the hero. He's a hero that sometimes turns into a villain. Sometimes he's dancing on that knife's edge. And sometimes he seems to rehabilitate himself and save the day. And each different permutation or character in the story that echoes Azor Ahai is doing some of these different things. Talking about Stannis, we're going to see the ways in which he is carrying that torch and performing this role of the hero or the anti-hero or even a foil to the hero. And actually, I'll just skip ahead real quick. There's somebody in the Discord named Dan Solo had a really interesting set of observations. And by the way, if you're a member of our Discord, then I'm going to be, every time I do one of these character streams, I'll be asking for questions beforehand. So you'll have an opportunity to submit questions or comments. And this is actually a comment. So Dan is pointing out that Stannis really comes across like a false hero or a messiah figure, and he seems to be subverting all the common hero tropes. And he's got a link here, but we kind of know what they are, and he's pointed them out in this list. So, for example, he has a magic weapon that signifies him as the hero, but the sword is fake. It's not real Lightbringer. I hate to break it to you. Spoiler alert. He's got a magical bloodline. He is connected to the Targaryens as well as the Baratheons and thus the Durrandons. But that's true for a lot of people. He's like 1/16th Targ or something like that. So it's really not special. And the way that he talks about it is like, there was some mention of, a great aunt or something when Robert took the throne, but that didn't have really anything to do with it. So he has a wise mystical advisor, but she's a fanatic and she's using him for her own goals instead of really enacting his destiny.
Yeah, I mean, I think George is very well versed in the hero's journey, and he's built a number of people who sort of fit into it, but in various ways they mess it up. For Stannis, he's a classic fake. He's like fool's gold.
That's probably the good phrase for it. Fool's gold, kind of like that. And so the interesting part of his character is like, yeah, he's not Azor Ahai, but what is he? What's left? And specifically, we're going to ask the question, what's left when and if Stannis and Melisandre lose the illusion, their illusions are shattered. If Jon manifests as Azor Ahai, then we might wonder how Stannis is going to react to that. We're going to talk about that. So Stannis also has an army. He starts off with a very small army and he builds it. So that's kind of like the hero. And then he wants the job, which is kind of rare, actually. Usually the hero's resisting, and he seems to be pretty determined to be king. So most heroes save their loved ones, and unfortunately, Shireen is probably going to be sacrificed. And we're obviously going to talk about Shireen today. So nice set of observations there from Dan Solo. But yeah, that's kind of Stannis. He is acting out the role of Azor Ahai and Night's King, and also a Green Man, or you might even say Durran Godsgrief, who's imitating a Green Man. But he does it in his own particular way. And the thing I wanted to point out about the archetypes, I have focused, again, a lot on trying to discern the secrets of the Dawn Age, because that's the hidden story within the story. But of course, A Song of Ice and Fire is mostly about the present. Elio kind of, when he was dismissing my theories, he's like basically saying it's all about the present and that past stuff doesn't matter and it's kind of just having fun, to delve into it. And he's not totally wrong there. Like, it's definitely 99% about the main characters. However, George obviously had fun doing the backstory. Maybe it's 95%, I don't know. And we know that everything's coming back around, so it is relevant. However, as I have studied the books more, I definitely have come to see how George uses the mythical archetypes to complement and build out the characters. And probably the best, earliest example of this is when Catelyn is on the way to Storm's End, Sean, and she's about to try to settle the big beef between Renly and Stannis. And as she's going there, she's giving us the story of Durran Godsgrief in her inner monologue. And it's like 3 or 4 pages. She goes through this whole myth of Durran and Elenai and the 7 castles, and it just builds up this idea of how stubborn these Baratheons are. So that by the time we get to that meeting and they're butting heads, it's just heightened because of that parallel to the past. So yeah. And when you talk about Azor Ahai, there's a spectrum of Azor Ahai. We see this. Yeah, I mean, one thing you just said was that Azor Ahai could just be recognized as the hero. And even though George doesn't have classic
heroes for the most part. They're always kind of subverting it in some way. There's a spectrum for Azor Ahai, and you can see it where some Azor Ahais are more associated with the others, some are more associated with green men type figures, some are all dragon. And we have Stannis here, who is basically like the middle of the road, and so everything goes wrong.
I'm trying to think of the way I would encapsulate it. Yeah, I wrote this sentence here as far as his symbolic archetypes. He's a former green man because of his house, who's turned to fire, but is essentially getting burned out and now frozen by his use of this fire. So you remember when Salador San is giving Davos the story of Azor Ahai, and he talks about Stannis' sword, and he's like, delineates between a burning sword, delineates between a burning sword and a burnt sword. And he's like, that was a burnt sword, and be glad, because the real one was truly terrible. And then he tells the story of Nissa's blood magic, sacrifice or murder, depending on how you want to read it. So that's Stannis. He has turned to fire, but he's now getting frozen.
Well, and that's the problem of taking all these things at face value. Like, for one, if you are taking the story of Azor Ahai at face value, that guy just murdered his wife. That's not great. Stannis takes the story at face value, but then, he still does not even murder his wife. So, I mean, aside from that, really kind of just being confirmation that this is meant to be viewed like most folklore and mythology in world, that it's supposed to be symbolic or metaphorical or parallels or whatever. It's also, he's just not doing it right. He's not doing any of these things right, but he is getting to each point in the hero's journey. There's a 17-point bullet list that Joseph Campbell has, and George has had fun with every single point. And Stannis gets to each one, but he fucks it up every time for every individual one.
Well, what's funny is, first, they do escalating levels of severity, because Melisandre's been talking about sacrificing children from the beginning. And he's like, well, what if we tried the statues? And so we start the book out, and they've got the statues stabbing each other. The maiden lay athwart the warrior, her arms widespread as if to embrace him. The mother seemed almost to shudder as the flames came licking up her face. There's the agony and ecstasy shudder. And a long sword had been thrust through her heart. Its leather grip was alive with flame. So what if we don't use a real woman? What about if we just use a very important statue? I was like,
Well, is the statue made out of dragon ships?
It was, Sean. It was.
Pretty big tangent, but yeah.
It is. We should read that whole chapter, actually, sometime. That would be a good one to read. And so getting back to the color chart here.
Right.
A green man. So Robert and Renly, obviously, have the stag man, green man imagery. We're familiar with that. Stannis does not really manifest that. Right from the beginning, he's changed his sigil to the fiery heart, and the stag is now enclosed in the fiery heart as if it is burning.
And one thing I think is important to notice when we're highlighting the differences between the Robert and Renly archetype and the Stannis archetype is that they're green men. They marry Sun Queen figures. So we have, a golden Lannister for Robert. We have a golden Tyrell for Renly, whether you're talking about Loras or Marjorie. And then for Stannis, he marries a frozen blue rose maiden figure. Like, they literally have blue roses circling their sigil of a fox, which is basically, you talked about the red fox being Azor Ahai, but it's also a Diet Stark. Blue rose and fox. Fox is a poor man's direwolf. And we have the blue roses of Lyanna. So
I remember vividly the first time I looked at that Florent sigil, thinking about Lyanna and Night's Queen, because I was searching for clues about Selyse. And so they talked, and this is talking about this pattern of all the Azor Ahai figures, the major ones, these dark solar kings. They always have two queens, and they're usually ice and fire queens. You might say summer and winter. I guess that's really the best way to say it. And so we see, for example, Aegon. He's got Visenya and Rhaenys. Rhaegar has Elia of Dorne, heavy sun symbolism, solar fire symbolism, and of course Lyanna of the blue winter rose symbolism. Sure. And then with Azor Ahai, of course, if he's Night's King, then you have Nissa and Night's Queen. And so when we see this pattern, why don't you Why don't you kick this quote to the people here?
Lady Melisandre wore no crown, but every man there knew that she was Stannis Baratheon's real queen, not the homely woman he had left to shiver at Eastwatch by the sea. Talk was, the king did not mean to send for Queen Celise and their daughter until the Nightfort was ready for habitation.
So obviously the Nightfort, where Night's king and queen got down. We're going to talk about the Nightfort a little bit more. But yeah, this queen was left to shiver. And then so they're comparing Melisandre to Queen Celise, even though he didn't marry Melisandre. Obviously, they've been sleeping together, and they are both queens in different ways. So it's pretty easy to draw the comparison. And a similar quote here, though the queen they followed was the red one, talking about the queen's men. The queen's men, that's not a reference to Celise, it's a reference to Melisandre, the red one at Castle Black, not the wife that Stannis had left behind at Eastwatch. Yeah, right from the beginning. And the original point here is that he's a winter king, Stannis, and he's really the opposite of Robert and Renly. So Robert and Renly, they never get the cold queen, okay? They only have that like spring maiden partner, and then they die. So
they never had the second queen, only the cold.
Because it's a cycle. It's Oak and Holly King, really. Yeah. That's probably the correct framing of it. And I guess I'm just taking that for granted that everyone's familiar with that. But of course, just to explain it, the Oak and Holly King, it's like taking the Green Man and splitting him into two personalities. And, the Summer King is essentially, I wrote it somewhere here. The Summer Kings embody, plenty, wealth, youth, vigor, summer richness. Basically like the ghost of Christmas present.
That's the example I always use because he's a classic summer king. And what do you do during the winter on Christmas? You have a big feast, right? It's the one day of plenty and summer's power. You saved up a bunch of food during the winter for it. It's the one day of summer's power during the heart of winter. It's why we have, so many important deities who have their birthday on it, who are summer king figures. And of course, your ghost of Christmas present dies before the day is over and is replaced by the Grim Reaper, who is a classic winter king.
Exactly. And so you can see that, of course, there was that first scene where Robert comes into Winterfell, and it's the same thing with him and Ned. Ned can't laugh. His laughter's frozen. He's stark and emaciated and gaunt and all those words. And Robert's boisterous and talking about the summer wines and the naked girls and all that stuff. So Renly is similar. Renly has the Knights of Summer. He has, he's put on the Garth wear of Highgarden because he's essentially wedded Marjorie Tyrell. And so he's taken the black and yellow Baratheon colors and flipped them back to green because, of course, the Baratheons are kind of like black and yellow versions of green men. So Renly's really bringing it back to the roots there. And it also implies him as wedding himself to the land. He's marrying a daughter of Garth, if you will, a daughter of the Reach, a green woman, Marjorie. And Marjorie's got lots of good Child of the Forest symbolism and stuff. But so the whole point of this is that this is Stannis's background. He's from this house with all this green man symbolism, but he is somehow denied that legacy. He is like the green men who are excised from the Weirwood net and left out in the cold to become the others. That's what's happening to Stannis. He has this green legacy, but he was denied Storm's End. Storm's End is the seat of the Durrandon kings. Renly got it, and Renly got the green symbolism. Stannis was denied. He was sent to Dragonstone, which is a lonely, cold, barren rock. Well, it's not cold, I guess. If you're close to the volcanic vents, it's warm, but you get it. If you're on the beach, it's cold. It
sucks there.
It sucks. Yeah, it's the point. They talk about it's a dreary place. Stannis is like Scrooge. He doesn't light many candles.
It's kind of telling. Like one of the patterns you've remarked upon before is when Robert is dying and the room is so hot that Ned is sweating. Gods, it's cold in here. Renly gets stabbed. Cold. And Jon never felt the fourth knife, only the cold.
Yeah, and anyway. So it's this, and that's basically what I'm trying to say is that like Stannis is an honorary Stark. He's like Ned. And when we were talking about in the Ned character stream, we're saying it's easy to see why Ned and Robert like each other. Robert reminds Ned of Brandon, and Ned reminds Robert of Stannis. So they're opposite, but they're used to that opposite personality. And so that, yeah, round peg, round hole. But there's no homoeroticism at all between those guys, at all.
No, they just really appreciate each other being shirtless and muscled like a maiden's fantasy, and
very platonic maiden's fantasy. I mean, if I were a maiden, Ned says, I'm not, but if I were, basically, I'm not gay or nothing, but like, you're muscled like a maiden's fantasy.
Bro, no homo, but maybe a little.
Oh, okay. And the point of this is that the character personalities are following the archetypes here. So our green characters are, again, they're full of vigor and youth. And Renly is allied with the Reach, where they have all the food and abundance. He's got a huge army, the Knights of Summer. And then Stannis has this meager, threadbare army of lords with small little lands on windswept rocks and stuff like that. I'd almost call it over the top, but it's certainly hard to miss. And so Robert and Renly are whimsical and impulsive, where Stannis is what I would call implacable. So even though we're going to talk about stubbornness, Robert and Renly are both stubborn, but they're not stubborn in the same way that Stannis is. They are more given to rage or excitement, these kind of mood swings, sudden ideas, whereas Stannis, he is just stuck on stuff.
They get Fae vibes. A lot of Fae vibes from all of the green men, which is not surprising.
Yeah, lots of Bacchus, Dionysus, let's get drunk and, be satyrs. And so Stannis, he brings Ralorism to Westeros. So denied this green heritage, he is now allied with a demonic witch and a demon god. And everyone's kind of freaked out about it. And wedding Ralorism, essentially, is draining Stannis of his life fires and his young relatives. There's the metaphor of the burning crown. Stannis says he looks into the fire and he saw a king with a crown of fire and it consumed him. Davos is talking about the cost, and Stannis is like, I know the cost. So he realizes that this is taking everything from him, and he is still marching forward. And that's kind of why potentially he's willing to sacrifice other people, because it's like, I'm hard on myself, so I'm going to be hard on you. I'm sacrificing myself for the cause, and I might have to sacrifice you, and that's just the price.
Yeah, I mean, as far as characters in A Song of Ice and Fire go, he's at least pretty consistent.
He is. He has basically one major moment of growth that we'll talk about. And so now he's moved into this northern arc of imitating both Azor Ahai, who obviously must have gone to the wall and mixed it up, but then also Night's King, as we said. So he's Lord of the Nightfort, like the Night's King, and there's a few other things we'll mention. But then he's also willing, potentially, it's going to be involved somehow in the sacrifice of his own child. And he's already tried to sacrifice Edric Storm, and they've burned a few other less significant people who did, some minor cannibalism or something. I don't know, whatever.
Or worshipped the Seven really aggressively, or it was fine.
Alistair Florent may have sent a, peace offer to the Lannisters that Stannis didn't want him to send, which is kind of treason, but,
It is, yeah. But it's also, he's like a direct relative of yours and the head of a major house. Like, that was a brutal move.
Stannis has very little mercy, which we'll talk about. So we already got into this, but just to wrap up, or just to sort of summarize, that's the word I was looking for. The Green Man heritage is something Stannis left behind. It's from the house. He doesn't have it. It's from his house. So obviously Garth the Green is a typical Green Man fertility god from the Reach. He is like a cross of the Jolly Green Giant and the Ghost of Christmas Present, and like Robert Baratheon. The important thing about Garth the Green is that sometimes he dies to bring the spring, and sometimes he demands sacrifices. Sometimes he kills to bring the spring. So there is this darker idea, and it's almost like that Azor Ahai heroic dichotomy of like, is the hero this guy Azor Ahai, who's killing other people and demanding blood sacrifice for his weapon? Or is it Nissa, somebody willing to lay their life on the line for the good of the world? And I always talk about that as this dichotomy. And so it's right there in the Green Man cycle.
Well, and what we see over and over again in every single Azor Ahai figure is that they either die or they die symbolically. So it is his role to die or die symbolically. I would argue that he definitely had a very symbolic death on the Blackwater. And, we'll see what happens later. But, every one of our Azor Ahai characters goes through this, and there's going to be a range. Are they doing it for selfish reasons? Are they doing it to try to gain some type of crazy magical power, or symbolically gain that? Or is it more self-sacrificial? And they're all going to appear at different points on that spectrum.
And yeah, I've got a point about the different Azor Ahai versions tucked away a little further on. So we'll get to that. And then the other thing about Garth the Green is that Green Man culture was heavily influential on the early First Men, such as the kings of House Durrandon. They're dressing up like green men, except for they changed the color from green to yellow. That antler crown is a House Durrandon thing. It goes back way, way back. The Storm Kings have, we don't know how far back, but presumably all the way back. They seem like traditional folk. So they are either imitating the green men, or they perhaps originally were green men, or they were green seers, like we've talked about many times. It's something like that. Some version of that. We don't know exactly. But it's comparable to the Gardener Kings of the Reach, who are also imitating Garth and trying to rule with the legitimacy established by the Green Men.
Yeah, and they're directly related a bunch of times to the Gardeners that the Tyrells are, so it was an easy transition for them. But yeah, we see different stops on Garth's journey. If he was real or symbolic, if he made that journey from the broken arm of Dorne all the way up to the north, where he's like the first king, at different stops in his journey, he's going to look different. So when he's in his, Storm's End era, he's going to look like a storm god who fights against the gods of storm and sea, or storm and wind, or sea and wind, or whatever. And then when he gets to the Reach, he's going to look more like the Garth we talk about, where he's this fertility god who taught them how to farm, who made everybody pregnant, blah, blah, blah.
Right, yeah, it's being shaped by the local culture. And so we get up to the Barrowlands, and now the first king is a Barrow King. He's a dead giant. Yeah, so that's a good point. And that's George imitating real life, of course, where when we do have these monomyths, not monomyths really, but when we have a scenario where one culture branches out, and so you have an original myth that then mutates, and so they become cousins, and there's recognizable similarities, but they've each wandered away. You go down a few more centuries, and they wander more, and after a time, they look totally different. But then you look at the Legend of Durn God's Grief and the Legend of the Grey King, and you're like, wait, they're both marrying mermaids. They're both fighting storm gods. They're both having their halls drowned by said storm gods. They're both stealing magical things from the gods. They're both having 100 children and founding a nation. One of them has antlers on his head, and the other has driftwood on his head.
It's like the Spider-Man pointing at each other meme, except there's like 12 of them.
And even the god pairings there's 12 of them, exactly. But these two in particular are some of the, most similar. So you can see that this myth made it to the coasts, and it changed other parts. The Ironborn, obviously Grey King, has all this other stuff added that isn't in the Durin myth. But you can see that a core body of it is parallel.
Yeah. Inaluki in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is called the Storm King and has an antler crown. Yeah. Historically, you see a lot of unification of the Storm King or God in the Green Man, whether it's a godly incarnation of the Green Man like Pan or Baphomet. There's all of the versions of it, like Baal and everything in the Middle East. They're all storm gods. The goats, they're all storm gods.
So this Green Man influence, like I said, this is for Stannis. This is a background. It's not something that he has, but it's something that he could have had. It's from his house. And so with House Durrandon, like we said, they're imitating the Gardener Kings. This is exemplified by Robert and Renly. So we've already mentioned some stuff. The first scene with Robert and Ned is trademark Summer King, Winter King stuff. But then also one thing I love is that Robert, when he dies, he's in his hunting greens and he's in the wood. So he's literally a green man in the wood. And then Renly, it parallels Renly's death. He dies in his green armor in the green tent, which is described as a magical green castle alive with light. So they both have green man deaths in the wood. Go ahead.
and an emerald pavilion.
Follow the yellow brick road.
Ow.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've been. Remember in the other live, I just yelled out about the House of Black and White being the Wizard of Oz. That has been bothering me for a while. But anyway, someday we'll have to do a Wizard of Oz stream.
Yeah, and I can do a good. We represent the Lollipop Guild. Yeah, I got all that stuff, man. I got that. That wasn't even my best. I got to work on it. Of course, there is a big wood next to Storm's End, which is the Rainwood. And we know that's a stronghold of the Children of the Forest. It still has weirwoods. And literally some of the first Durrandon kings, we know they were friendly with the Children of the Forest. So there's all these associations with House Durrandon that, again, Stannis didn't get, but his brothers did. So it just shows you that Oak and Holly King dichotomy. I believe I've made my point. So then there is this wrinkle to the archetype of the Green Man with the Storm King. As you mentioned, Sean, it's mutated a bit in the Stormlands to sort of suit the personality of the region. And so now we have this Durin Godsgrief figure who is full of wrath. And I think that is part of the Baratheon, like they're all wrathful. So I have to assume there's a lot of ways to break down Baratheon phonetically, but it just seems like, yeah, there's the Cape Wrath right there. We've got wrathful storm gods and wrathful storm lords and Robert Baratheon.
My favorite is that it means rose god. And it adds an extra wrinkle to the idea of his bastard daughter in King's Landing named Bera. It just means rose. And she's red-haired.
So that would be War of the Roses reference somehow?
Yeah.
I haven't worked my way up to that in English history. I'm still at the Battle of Hastings, so.
No, and it's funny because, it's pretty clear who Robert would be representing in the War of the Roses, but then you have Stannis is on the other side. His most apt parallel is from the Yorks. So like you were saying, he's a Stark in his actual symbolism.
Yeah, that's that whole Richard III thing. I was trying to cram the Richard III parallel knowledge in time, but I really couldn't. I think I need to understand the whole war to really get it, so.
It was messy. Very messy.
Let's see here. Oh, yes. So this Durin Godsgrief, it's a wrinkle for the archetype because the Green Men are basically, they are the gods. They are the old gods. They're in harmony with the weirwoods. They may, with the green weirwoods and that whole theory. But now we've got this Green Man type Durin Godsgrief who is giving the gods grief, as his name would imply. So this now is beginning to sound more like the myths of Prometheus, Lucifer, Phaethon, Icarus, and also Azor Ahai and Night's King. Remember, Night's King knew no fear, so he took this magical woman and declared himself a king when he wasn't supposed to. Azor Ahai, blood sacrifice, broke the moon, trying to become a great hero, supposedly he did. So these are very ambitious people, and they are people trying to possess the things of the divine things, divine power, trying to become God men, God on earth, etc., God emperor. And as Tim would point out, the King in Yellow is another important layer here. And this may be the reason why George chose to change the Baratheon colors to yellow and black. The King in Yellow is a character from H.P. Lovecraft who essentially ties dragon ideas and stagman ideas together in a very sinister way. And so this is a darker connotation. And we see that Stannis, when he does his new sigil, he wears a yellow cape and he takes on a lot more yellow in his colors, as well as the red. So, and we see it with the Victorian and the Ironborn too. Again, Grey King myth mirroring the Durin Godsgrief myth. The Greyjoys in particular have basically the same colors as the Baratheons. So, and then of course the crux of Durin Godsgrief is that his beef with the gods causes this great destructive storm and flood, or even series of floods. I think that's an andalization of the myth. But the point is, his castle was wiped out. And it was a storm and a flood, so it's some sort of tsunami event. And this parallels very well, of course, to the Hammer of the Waters myth, where the Green Men caused the flooding of the Arm of Dorne. And that seems to be the same flood recorded in the Durin myth. So some part of this universal myth that made its way to the Iron Islands and to the Stormlands is originally inspired by the Hammer of the Waters legend, where green men, potentially on their own volition or under the control of Azor Ahai or something like that. We're not going to get into all that today, but the green man magic was used by Azor Ahai to crack the moon, bringing down the moon meteors, and that's the Hammer of the Waters. And so this idea of the green men summoning this great storm hammer thing, this holy thunderbolt, there's all these different versions of it that fell down the land and broke the land. Of course, that's going to inspire different myths. It's the kind of event that would inspire different versions of the story. And so it definitely seems like the green men are tied to this because all the different versions of it have some sort of green man figure, Durrandon, Grey King, or just flat out the Green Seers on the Isle of Faces, who would be the green men, as being responsible. And then, of course, Robert, hard to miss, carries around a big hammer. So he's like a walking depiction of the green men causing the Hammer of the Waters. Like he's a green man walking around with a hammer.
He kills an Azor Ahai figure in the water in a river called the Trident.
Indeed, because that's part of the cycle. So just as demonic Azor Ahai dragon-coated Stannis wars with Renly back and forth, it's the same thing with Robert killing Rhaegar at the Trident. Exactly right. It is the same Oak and Holly King version. Because the Holly King very frequently gets the dragon side of things in Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
It's underworld. Basically, think of the Holly King as the underworld god. Dragons and Starks, they're both underworld coded. It's all Cerberus, Hades stuff. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. And dragons require a sacrifice. And yes, the Targaryen dragon has 3 heads, like you said, Cerberus. But it's also something that you talked about way back in the podcast days was how that battle with Rhaegar and Robert is imitating the Chaos Conf, the basic storm god versus primordial serpent dragon figure in the water, and how that kind of shapes civilization.
Yeah, exactly. It's the order versus chaos conf legend. Yeah, George does give it a pretty strong representation in the story, just in the way that he combines like Morningstar resurrection cycle ideas with Green Man resurrection cycle ideas. Like the chaos conf tracks pretty nicely onto the Oak and Holly King thing. So he just sort of mashed it together. Yeah, that's what he did. That's interesting. It's really is a mythology jam here in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not my fault. It's George's fault. Blame him.
But yeah, it's something, either one person said it or 2 people said it. One person said it twice, whatever. They're talking about how when Catelyn was describing Storm's End, it was a fist on an up-jutted hill of land or something like that. And she's basically describing the fist of the first man.
So yeah, there is a repeating metaphor of the fist. I have that in here when I'm talking about Stannis' stubbornness and the whole stubbornness of the God's Grief archetype. And it's like the castle is an upthrust fist. And in that context, it really reads like somebody going like this to the gods, just been like, up yours, buddy.
You love to see it.
It's, again, an example of, the upthrust fist, it represents the mushroom cloud and the burning tree and all the symbolic crap. But it's also like the attitude of it is important too. Like the fist of the first men. It sounds like a place where the first men made their stand. This is the furthest penetration of the fist of the first men. It's the furthest outpost to the north. No, you can't. Just go ahead and laugh. Let me just start that sentence again. It's the furthest north the first men ever penetrated into the haunted forest, and possibly into the north at all. Like, we had not seen any ancient strongholds of the first men further than that. So it really is, it's them punching into the north. So yeah, the attitude of the symbols is always important. This is all background for Stannis. He is like an ex-green man. And as I alluded to at the beginning, ex-green men are a thing. The others used to be green men. Somebody once made a video about that. Basically, it's some version of the others used to be weirwood spirits. They used to be Child of the Forest spirits, which go into the weirwoods and mingle spirits. Or my version is that they used to be green man spirits, because I think the original green seers were green men. It seems like the others are green men that are cut off from the weirwood net. Or you could say they're green seer spirits excised from the Weirwood net. And Stannis is essentially showing us that. Again, denied Storm's End, denied the Iron Throne as well, the rightful kingship of the land. He's denied, left out in the cold, and then he goes all the way up to the north because he has no other option. So it's showing us the ice and fire version of the Winter King, which is basically, like I said, a banished Summer King or a dead Summer King. Yeah, he also is defying the gods like during God's Grief because he doesn't worship the Seven or the old gods, who are the gods of Westeros, but instead a new demon god. So just like during God's Grief, he is defying tradition and defying the gods. He also does have a controversial magic woman, Melisandre, who is kind of like Elenai. Melisandre is from across the sea, whereas Elenai is from the sea.
Yeah, well, in Elenai, you brought it up before, that's Hellenistic. It's definitely referring to something very specific. And we get that archetype, too, when we look at another Azor Ahai figure, Uthor of the High Tower. So he's got his the woman he marries that he kind of has to
Mary's
steal.
the most fair.
Yeah,
daughter of Garth the Green.
That's also some Helen stuff.
We're going to get into Orys Baratheon. Same thing. He is a dragon who defeats the storm god and marries the daughter of this green man storm god, Argella Durrandon. So it is a repeating pattern as ever it were. And so in that one, Orys, basically because Orys Baratheon adopts the regalia and sigil of House Durrandon, when they are fighting, it's really two storm gods fighting each other. But one is a dragon and the other is, we'll get into it. Yeah. We'll get into Orys. I've got some notes on Orys. So real quick, let's just cover the Azor Ahai stuff. We mentioned this quickly, but there's a couple things I missed. So not only is Stannis role-playing Azor Ahai by literally claiming to be it, and they're doing the whole thing with the statue, we just read the quote, he also matches Azor Ahai's thematic element of being willing to sacrifice innocent people in order to gain magic power. That's the defining aspect of the myth, and Stannis is lining up to do that. He probably would have done it with Edric if not for Davos, and we're going to talk about Shireen. And then, of course, Stannis' sigil is that fiery heart. It makes us think of Nissa Nissa. Lightbringer was tempered in her heart, so that means her heart was set on fire, and this was a magical act which transferred her life and her vitality and stuff into the blade. So this fiery heart of R'hllor, if you want to say R'hlorism, that sigil probably derives from the Azor Ahai myth. I mean, they worship Azor Ahai as their hero, so it really must. Kind of has to. Yeah,
well, and I mean, just to kind of give some context for Melisandre as his kind of fiery wife here. Aside, you brought up her name. It's a combination of Cassandra from Greek mythology. Mm-hmm. Somebody who is a seer who sees the future, warns the Trojans not to let in the Trojan horse and beware Greeks bearing gifts, etc. And wildfire is actually in our world called Greek fire. And she was the one who she said she could have stopped the wildfire. Like if she had been at the Battle of the Blackwater, they would have won. And
I didn't even think about her having power over the fire itself. But you're right. She may have be able to influence the way it was burning and sort of blow it in a different direction away from their ships or something. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it's impossible to know exactly, what kind of power she has because she plays so many games with it. But her name is a combination of Melian and Cassandra. Melian being the kind of godlike figure from the Silmarillion who marries into the Elven kings, and then her descendants are everybody from Elrond, Arwen, and Aragorn.
So I wonder if Melian is inspired by the Melii, the Greek Melii, because I connected the Melii to Melisandre because of their associations with the ash tree and the honey sap and a couple other things.
So Melian lives in an underground throne room with her husband, a wood elf, a Sindarin, who they live among the roots of ash trees, and they have an ash root throne. Perfect. So yes, she is a Melii.
Man, there's an ash root throne.
Yeah.
In the Silmarillion.
Yeah, I mean the Silmarillion. He's really.
I mean, they're both riffing off Norse mythology. I guess it's not surprising. I just didn't know. I'm surprised that I never heard about it because I've read the Silmarillion. Of course, I was very young, but
it's a lot Norse mythology, but there's a fair amount of Greek mythology too, with the head of the Valar being very much a Zeus parallel. He's a Lord of Eagles, etc. But yeah, Melian is a Maya or Maiar, which is it's from Greek for the Earth goddess. So it's all the themes are pretty consistent because it's Tolkien. So same thing with George R. R. Martin.
We really need to do a Tolkien stream. So
yeah.
Well, thanks for fleshing that out. But yeah, it's a good. The main thing is just like the broad archetype of a magical woman of the gods. But of course, since we know there's this running metaphor with the Green Sea, any woman that's from the sea, like Elenai, might be meant to make us think of a woman from the Green Sea, which would be a Child of the Forest woman. So let's not get lost on all that. But yeah. So the other part about Stannis being Azor Ahai is that he has this plot arc of journeying north to fight the others, which is obviously kind of the whole point of all of this stuff. Is fighting the others, both in the past and in the future. So he is paralleling that, and he's going from Dragonstone too. So that's important because it's a black dragon castle. So the obvious parallels would be to like Ahai. If we're thinking about the original Azor Ahai, he comes from Ahai, a city of black stone associated with dragons. And we also might think of the Valyrians.
The topless towers.
Right, and the Valyrians, along the same theme, they are constantly sacrificing innocence for magic power. And they're kind of essentially trying to replicate the Azor Ahai myth when they make Valyrian steel with human sacrifice. That's where they got the idea, I think. So,
and they call it a mine. The Valyrians have their mines, and they would occasionally come upon a fireworm down in the mines. It's very Balrog-y.
Well, I've got a note about that because Melisandre and Stannis walk together in the deep places under Dragonstone. So they go down there to visit the Balrog.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, George is constantly referring to it. He loves the Balrog, it seems.
Yeah, then go down to the underworld and come up and kill him on top of an icy mountain. Yeah, it works very well for George's idiom.
And it would seem to me that the Balrog is based on Surtr, the fire giant with the giant flaming sword.
Yeah. Yes. Definitely also.
Who guards a bridge or attacks a bridge.
Yes. The Rainbow Bridge. Or
the Bifrost. He attacks it, not guards it. That's important because Jon is Surtr. Right. And when Stannis and Jon have that conversation around the map, Stannis puts his Lightbringer sword across the wall, like lays it down across the wall. So I've talked about this as foreshadowing of a comet hitting the wall and the wall being like an ice sword, like Dawn and all this stuff. There's a lot of symbolism going on there. But it's also literally Stannis and Jon as giants with the map as the land. So they're giants, and Stannis has the fire sword. And of course, Jon dreams of wielding the flaming sword atop the wall, which is basically George's version of the Bifrost. So Jon is both guardian of the Bifrost, but also destroyer of it because he's so many times foreshadowed to have his resurrection be tied with the destruction of the wall. That's almost surely coming. So it'll be a comet or a moon meteor hitting the wall, Jon being resurrected or freed from other enchantment, and there'll be lots of Surtr going on there. So it's interesting, George understanding both Surtr and the Balrog, he's kind of referring to both in different places. And the Balrog isn't evil either, right? He's like a Maiar. He's just kind of like an elemental spirit or something.
They're corrupted Maiar, like Morgoth made them by basically corrupting the Maiar in the same way that he corrupted other Maiar into dragons.
Well, so it all boils down to how you feel about Morgoth then.
Oh, yeah, Morgoth did nothing wrong. No, it's actually the Surtr stuff is good, and it's even worse because Surtr destroys the Bifrost Bridge and essentially, cuts off the World Tree with the Sword of Frey. Summerbrander.
Oh.
He gets Summerbrander from a giant who stole it from Frey, and because Frey did not have Summerbrander to oppose Surtr, then that's why he was able to basically infuse his firepower into the fiery sword and end the world. So yeah, it's even worse. And also, Balrog is Gaelic mythology. It's we talked about this, Baelor and Birog, with Baelor of the Evil Eye and his ghostly servant Birog. With them being like Maiar spirits and of like fire and flame, like shadow and flame, like it's all very...
Tolkien combined the two words to get Balrog.
Right. And since, Sauron is already largely based on Baelor of the Evil Eye. Yeah.
Makes sense. That tracks. Yeah. So yeah, that was a nice Balrog discussion. And then the most important thing, I already mentioned it, but just that vision of the crown of fire consuming until there's nothing left. It ties into Beric talking about the fiery resurrection and how there's a little bit less left, and gosh, he's tired and kind of burnt out, if you will. And really 6 times Thoros, so.
Should have had a skin changer spirit in you, man. I don't know what to tell you.
You're either born with one or you're not.
Maybelline.
So the similar type thing. There's a toll being taken on Stannis, and he's well aware of it. But to his credit, he is willing to pay the price. So there is that. We talked about the Moon Queens and stuff. Now, Daenerys sees a vision of Stannis in her House of the Undying series of visions. And it says, glowing like a sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. Stannis has blue eyes, Stannis has the red sword, and Stannis has no shadow left because he's made 2 shadow babies. And Melisandre's essentially said, there's not much left there. Kind of tapped him out, She says that to Davos. So.
Well, and from a symbolic, literary, mythological perspective, the shadow has always been associated with the soul. So it's like, if he's given up pieces of his soul, he's been giving his seed and his soul to this Night's Queen figure. He's low on soul, so he has no shadow.
And then parallels his character, which we're gonna get into, obviously, but he doesn't have mercy on other people because he doesn't feel like anyone ever gave him mercy. So he is kind of soulless. He's like very by the rules, no compassion, very little love. He might love his daughter, hard to say, but we'll talk about that too. But then we look at the symbol of this is a combination of an other and Azor Ahai, glowing like the sunset, a red sword. So that's Azor Ahai stuff. Even the shadow casting could be Azor Ahai stuff. But the blue-eyed king is a Night's King, and we know Night's King definitely casts shadows, meaning creating the others. So, and that's depending. Even if you think Night King lived after the Long Night, he's still creating the others. Either way. So he's casting shadows. And so this, in a nutshell, is a big clue that Azor Ahai and the Night's King have some very important connection. They are one and the same, or one becomes the other, something like that. And Stannis is showing us both archetypes. So we just went over all this Azor Ahai stuff. Remember, literally role-playing Azor Ahai. Hard to miss.
Well, and it's also showing that from an mythical astronomy perspective, it's the morning star, even star cycle. So when they say glowing at sunset, we know what they're talking about. They're talking about the even star. That's when the even star comes out. When the sun goes down, the even star comes out. In the morning, before the sun's out, you have the morning star. So we're seeing different parts of his cycle. We're definitely seeing the Night's King even star point of the cycle when Dany is having her vision of him. But the morning star and the even star are both Venus. They're both the same planet, the same celestial body. So it's like, yeah, there is something very much in common with Azor Ahai and Night's King. They're the same person.
And we see, it's a great thing to mention. We see it with House Dane. They've got the Sword of the Morning and they got the Sword of the Evening. They got Dark Star. They've got Bright Stars. They got those swords in white, Arthur Dane all in white. So it's the cycle, it's the dichotomy. It's the same thing as Oak and Holly King. It fits George's idea of gray characters. The way that I like to explain this, Sean, is that George does not confer the permanent status of goodness onto people. He doesn't see that as a thing that happens. Goodness is something you can label an act as good or evil, but people are capable of all kinds of acts. And just because somebody mostly makes good choices doesn't mean they can't do something selfish or make a wrong choice. And so it's not that there's no right and wrong. It's just that people can never be permanently one thing or the other. Maybe evil. There may be a level of darkness that you give yourself to that you can't come back from, perhaps. But for the most part, I think you get what I'm saying. And real quick,
Davos tried to tell us.
What's that?
Davos tried to tell us.
Davos is the Jiminy Cricket. But here, I just want to point out, these are the first words of A Clash of Kings. The comet's tail spread across the dawn, a red slash that bled above the crags of Dragonstone like a wound in the pink and purple sky. So this is the morning star versus the even star. If you think about the comet's tail, so that's the red sword, it spread across the dawn. So think of dawn as the white sword and Lightbringer as the red sword, and they're crossing here. They're crossing swords at dawn. That's how I read this, because it's a wound. The sky is wounded, so the heavens are being torn open by this clash of opposite sides,
By this, dissociative personality disorder. But yeah, it's directly in the sigil for that one house that's kind of imitating House Faring, that's imitating House Dane, with the purple, and they have the two swords crossed and cut off in the middle. Yeah, so
beautiful. If I may, or if you may, actually, why don't you read my notes here? This is Stannis doing his Night's King routine. Take it away, Sean.
All right. Once again, we're role playing. This time as the Night's King. He takes the Nightfort as his seat, which is where the Night's Watch used to be run, and where the Night's King declared himself a king and took some icy woman as his bride. Creates shadow beings by giving his seed and soul to a witch. That really sounds like an extremely accurate / inversion of the Night's King giving his seed and soul to his icy queen and creating others. He binds people to his will with sorcery.
That one's a little bit flexible. So it's Night King is literally said to bind his brothers with sorcery. Stannis is using sorcery to impress people and influence people and accrue more like political power. So it's a little bit of a loose parallel, but I still think it's worth mentioning.
Well, it works because obviously he has a bunch of zealots.
Yes. They're specifically following his newfound religious power. So
right. Stannis is king secondary to the fact that they are following R'hllor. So it's very much a magical thing. All right. Takes command of the Night's Watch, which he does. He has an outrageous amount of power over the Night's Watch, and it's
he locks the doors and says you're not coming out until you pick a Lord Commander. He's manning the castles. You know what I mean? So he's really functioning as a Lord Commander here. It's like the king shows up to the wall and is like, "Hey, I've got a few ideas." The Lord Commander's like, "Okay, sure, we'll do that."
Well, if you're a king and you're ruling over the Nightfort, you're king of the Night's Watch.
Stannis is also a rebel king, meaning that whoever's the person sitting on the Iron Throne considers Stannis a rebel king, just as Night King, rose as essentially a rebel king and had to be put down by the Lord of Winterfell and the King Beyond the Wall. And Stannis isn't put down by those people, but he wars against both of those people. He fights the King Beyond the Wall first, Mance Rayder, and then he's going to Winterfell to fight the Lord of Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton.
Right, and we actually see this with all of our Night's King figures as they fight people north and south of the wall. So, yeah, we have the battle on two fronts here. We have it with Jon Snow as well. He goes north, he goes on the ranging, he kills a couple wildlings, he spares a ginger, and that majorly affects his story. And then when he fights the wildlings again, they had actually come from south of the wall. Yes,
you're right.
And now he's trying to go to war against the Boltons. So it's history repeating itself.
Well, anyway. It's actually Jon dreams of fighting his brother Robb and declaring himself the Lord of Winterfell. So we know the psychology behind that. It's very like childhood stuff being worked out. But it also does work to, he's fighting both wildlings from beyond the wall and his brother in that vision. And that's the great thing about that vision. It's mostly an Azor. I call it the Azor Ahai dream because he's got the burning red sword. But he's also doing Night's King and Bloodstone Emperor stuff there as well. He's combining all the archetypes. So, but just to bring it back to Stannis, Jon and Stannis do have a lot of parallels. I've got a section of plot parallels, but they also have this symbolism parallels as well. So good to bring up Jon. And here are these great quotes about Stannis. And this is the first time we see him up close. So we saw him on the beach in the prologue. No, I'm sorry. No, this is the Crescent prologue. So this is the first time we see Stannis, because the Burning of the Seven is in Davos's first chapter, which is like chapter 7 or 8 in Clash. So this is the prologue that just began. Remember, the comet was a wound across the sky. And we're going to see here that Stannis' eyes are like wounds. But why don't you go ahead and read this, Sean?
Though he was not yet 35, only a fringe of thin black hair remained on his head, circling behind his ears like the shadow of a crown. Stannis kept his own whiskers cropped, tight, and short. They lay like a blue-black shadow across his square jaw and the bony hollows of his cheeks. His eyes were open wounds beneath his heavy brows, a blue as dark as the sea by night. He had never been a fleshy man, but now the bones moved beneath his skin like spears, fighting to cut free. Even his crown seemed too large for his head. His eyes were blue pits lost in deep hollows, and the shape of a skull could be seen beneath his face. I love those, partly because, Aerea Targaryen in Fire and Blood? That's the vibe I'm getting from those spears trying to cut their way out. And
the worms.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got that right here in the notes. Old Stannis spear bones. That's what they call them.
It's a good Viking nickname.
It's a good Viking nickname. That's exactly right. It will be a good one. So, I mean, this language is really popping here. There's lots of darkness and shadow. He's got a shadow crown, a blue-black shadowed face. The blue is like the sea by night. So there's a lot of night and shadow symbolism, not only talking about the shadow babies that he's going to give birth to, but just his Night King archetype. And specifically those blue eyes. Not only do the others have blue eyes, but they're blue eyes like wounds, which suggests blue blood. And the others have blue blood.
Well, it's also just a kind of a god reference, where we get some overlap between the old gods and the others. When you're talking about the sky, a lot of ancient cultures, maybe most notably Egypt, they viewed the sky as, some god or goddess. So like when you talk about the moon and the sun, they were the eyes of Horus, or, stuff like that. So when we talk about,
there's a myth about Horus losing his eye, which is just the moon disappearing and reappearing. So This chapter began with the wound across the sky. And so now we see the eye wound. So you're right to bring that up. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, it's likening Stannis' face to the sky, to a sky god, because he's a storm god. So that makes sense.
Right. And although it's kind of like a brutal, macabre version with the purple and blue and dark, it's all very othery, as opposed to, the more classic gods that we expect to find in those, like Horus is a sun god. We expect to see storm gods up in the sky, like Zeus, but this is very different. This is dark and dead. And
then I also noticed the way that the hair is described gives him an open black circlet, just like the Stark crown. It's circled behind his ears like the shadow of a crown. And the Stark crown, it's an open iron circlet. So there's a lot of Stannis-Stark parallels, but really it's all tying back to this idea of the Ice and Fire version of the Holly King, the King of Winter. And so remember, the Starks and the Night King, they're like parallels. They're like almost the same. The Starks claim to be the kings of winter. A leader of the others would be the king of winter. It's the same guy. So that's why, remember, Night King is said to be a Stark and maybe the brother of the man who threw him down. So it's a family affair, and it's the same sort of symbols. Go ahead.
One wordplay that George keeps using in situations like this, and it is Stark against the Dawn. And it's funny because I think that's what happened, and that's what we see at the Tower of Joy. We see Ned Stark fighting against Arthur Dayne with Dawn, and then he brings it back to Starfall. So it's like he kills him, but there's a reconciliation, blah, blah, blah. But Stark against the Dawn, that's kind of what Stannis is doing right there with the wound against the Dawn, with the comet being like a sword. And we see the comet directly called a sword multiple times, sometimes specifically the sword that killed Ned.
Because the red sword in the sky is Stannis' sword. So it's kind of like Stannis is the one wounding the sky. which then lines up with the Durin Godsgrief story of angering the wind and sea gods by stealing from them until they launched a storm at him. So he did tear open the sky. So Stannis really is the storm god here. It's kind of like you're looking out across the narrow sea in the middle of the dark, in the middle of the night. You see the midnight sea, you see the shadows, and you see Stannis as this dark king of the midnight ocean, if you will. So there's a lot of ways you can go with that. But a lot of this language is also comparable to Euron. A lot of the blue-black stuff, the midnight sea, the wounds on the face like the sky. Euron has a moon face with the 2 different moons for eyes. Again, just like Horus. The thing that's similar, I think, between Euron and Stannis, because they are very different characters, they are both, however, paying a heavy price physically for their pursuit of magic power. And that is a key part of the Azor Ahai figure. And specifically, they're pursuing dragons. They're trying to get dragons. They're willing to do anything to get them.
Well, and I think, Stannis probably ends up paying the ultimate price for that, but Euron may be paying even more than that. Like, it's all very Lovecraftian, Tim. But, it's when you're replaying Lovecraft storylines, death is not the worst option.
No. No, it is not.
Euron's gonna have a rough time.
Yeah, and we'll talk about where Stannis' fate is going, but he's paying a price already is the point. Old spear bones, like we said. So I mentioned Orys Baratheon earlier. The main thing is that he's running that same archetype where he is the demonic version of the Horned God. He's killing the Green Man version, and he's taking his daughter, and then he's taking over his house. The thing is that Orys then goes on this journey of becoming like the Night King, and he becomes bitter and he becomes crabbed because he loses his hand. And there's all this stump stuff where he resigns his Aegon's hand because the king's hand needs a hand. Otherwise, let's start talking about the king's stump. And he was basically taken hostage by the Will of Will, called the Widow Lover, on the Bone Way. And him and 12 other nobles all had their right hands cut off before they were given back to Aegon, who paid for their weight in gold. And so Orys, much like Stannis, or like Robert even, begins to, there's this decline phase where they're getting, again, crabbed and bitter, vengeful, there's resentment, and he's been stumped. So this is like the others being kicked out of the trees being cut down, they're cut off from their trees. That's the stumping. Okay. And so then we have this last act. In 37 AC, he gets his revenge on the Will of Will during I think it's a 4th Dornish War or something. It's called the Vulture Hunt. And so he captures the son of the guy who cut his hand off, and he cuts off his hand and then his other hand, and then both feet. And he calls them his usury. Now, he dies on the march back to Storm's End of the wounds that he had taken. But supposedly, his son Davos said he died happy, smiling at the rotting hands and feet that dangled in his tent like a string of onions. So there's this specific call out to Davos the Onion Knight here. And I think that is to make us think of Stannis' story and compare Stannis to Orys.
Yeah, I did want to bring up Orys' name because first off, Orys is it's a shortening of Orion, which plays very well into the archetype, but also it means in various Germanic languages, Old Norse, it's derived from Ori, which means black rooster. So roosters have always been associated with the morning star. They wake you up in the morning in the same way the morning star have. A black rooster is like inverted, dark morning star or an even star, if you like. So it's,
And of course, Orys, that's the defining feature of him is his black hair. He even has black eyes. He doesn't have the blue eyes of the Baratheons. He's all black-eyed, black-haired.
And then, of course, a black rooster, and he takes on the colors of House Durrandon of black and yellow. So he's doing all of that stuff on multiple levels.
Very cool. I was wondering what the name was a reference to. And so if we're looking at the parallel here, Orys going south into Dorne is kind of like Stannis going north. They're both going into the wasteland, and they're going to fight an enemy. In particular, we see that Orys wins, but then dies. Mm-hmm. And so what's the parallel? Is Stannis going to win and then essentially die shortly after, feeling satisfied?
I don't know about satisfied. I don't know that Stannis is capable of satisfied, but I think it's very possible he wins his battle for Winterfell and then dies shortly after under pretty depressing circumstances.
And so, that's the only reason I can come up with to give this obvious reference to Davos here, is that we are supposed to think about Orys and Stannis as parallels. So, sometimes you get what you want, but you pay, like I said, a heavy price. So we'll have to table that discussion until we get to the Shireen part. But real quick, I pointed this out in the Daenerys Who's the Real Dany video, but Stannis has parallels to Dany and Jon, as you can see on the screen. But Dany first. So takes possession of Dragonstone. That's probably what Dany will do. Stannis, remember, he got Dragonstone after the war. So he wasn't originally in possession of it. He had to take possession of it. Dany will too. Stannis has declared Azor Ahai reborn on Dragonstone. That'll probably happen again with Dany. Dead older brothers who are themselves rivals. So Robert is Stannis' brother and Viserys is Dany's brother, and they were rivals, Robert and Viserys. They both claimed the throne. Let's see. Stannis and Dany both denied the Iron Throne, both usurped, if you will, and will have to take it by force or try. Stannis fights and loses a battle for King's Landing, which is very costly. It involves wildfire blowing up. Something like that will probably happen for Dany. Attacking King's Landing, be a lot of wildfire that goes off, heavy casualties, and maybe she'll turn back, decide not to press the attack. Stannis fights resurrected Renly at King's Landing. Dany will probably be fighting Fagon. Fagon is, if he was who he says he was, he would be Dany's nephew. So it's a little similar. You're fighting your close relative for King's Landing.
And they're both fakes. Aegon is not really Aegon. He is a Blackfire. And the ghost of Renly, who fought on the Blackwater, is, of course, which Tyrell was it?
Oh, Garland.
Was it Garland?
Garland Tyrell.
Who's the
Garland,
actual...
with the Garth name, yeah.
Right, yeah. Willis is the one who's going to be the next Lord of Highgarden.
So essentially, yes, you're right. They're both fake. So Stannis retreats back to Dragonstone, then hears from Jon Snow about a more dire threat in the north and decides to go defend the wall and help Jon Snow in the Night's Watch. So wouldn't it make sense if Dany got a letter from Jon Snow about a threat from the north and then went north to help the Night's Watch? It's right there.
Well, and a lot of these parallels actually apply to Aegon the Conqueror as well.
Oh, I suppose they would, yeah. Yeah, because he goes north and makes like a treaty with the Starks. So that's kind of like making a treaty with the others, yeah.
Yeah, it's the last place he fights. And, he came from Dragonstone, took the kingship just like they did or tried to. Yeah. A lot of the same. Definitely.
And it also makes you wonder about the pact, like the pact they make with the Starks there. They get the Starks to kneel. So it's kind of like, Azor Ahai somehow got the... Anyways, I said we were going to use the Azor Ahai symbolism to tell us about Stannis.
Right.
So Jon Snow parallels to Stannis. They're both defending the wall. They both know the wildlings aren't the true enemy, and they're both on board with the plan to let them through and integrate them into Westeros. It's the same green man, Azor Ahai, Night's King symbolic archetype. Jon is a green man because he's a skin changer. Essentially, that's green. It's green magic. But he's then doing an Azor Ahai Night's King thing, getting frozen. So a lot of parallels there. We've already talked about some of that Jon Snow, Azor Ahai stuff. Mel wants to make a shadow baby with both. She made some with Stannis and very much wants to make one with Jon. They both lead an army south from the wall. Well, Stannis has, and Jon was about to, and still may. So they're both doing that, which is a Night King thing, attacking Westeros from the north, from the wall. Right. They're both defending Winterfell from usurpers, okay? Or Jon will be, Stannis is. And they're both in the shadow of their brothers. So can you read this quote for me here?
They crossed the yard together, just the two of them. The snow fell all around them. She walked as close to Jon Snow as she dared, close enough to feel the mistrust pouring off him like a black fog. He does not love me. He will never love me, but he will make use of me. Well and good. Melisandre had danced the same dance with Stannis Baratheon back in the beginning. In truth, the young Lord Commander and her king had more in common than either one would ever be willing to admit. Stannis had been a younger son living in the shadow of his elder brother, just as Jon Snow, bastard-born, had always been eclipsed by his true-born sibling. The fallen hero men had called the young wolf. Both men were unbelievers by nature, mistrustful, suspicious. The only gods they truly worshipped were honor and duty.
So there you go. They're similar characters, and it's a similar sort of stiff, we've got to follow the rules kind of thing. And they're both a little bit got a chip on their shoulder, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sean, Stannis the Manus, meaning Stan the man Stannis, the one true king of Westeros, as he's sometimes called. Let's talk about his personality traits, the first of which has got to be bitterness. He is bitter about what was his by rights. He mentions it more than once in that first couple of chapters. Being taken from him, not once but twice, because again, Storm's End, his by rights, and now the Iron Throne, his by rights. No one wants to give it to him. Can't figure out why. He lacks charisma and leadership. That's probably the main reason, to be honest. It's sort of an extension of these, Summer King, Winter King archetypes. The Summer Kings have charisma. They are charming. Stannis, not so much. Ned, not really, endearing, yes. Charming, not really. It's not really a gabber. I mean, he's pretty tight-lipped.
Inspires loyalty through his actions.
Yes, in a northern context.
No. Yeah, not a charismatic guy. It's like filling out a D&D character sheet again. In the Winter Kings, they don't have, nobody likes winter.
Lawful good, lawful neutral. Where's lawful boring? So Stannis' bitterness really has been self-sabotaging for him. It prevented him from working things out with Renly, not just in that moment, but the previous 10 years. Why were they not close enough to be more in communication as the shit was going down? Like, you could say that about all three Baratheon brothers. The Lannisters were destroying the nascent Baratheon dynasty, and Robert did not really have the help of either of his brothers when it came down to it. So, bitterness of Stannis was a big factor in that. He was not close with Renly, and then when they finally had all the power. If they could have stood together somehow, they could have smote the Lannisters easily and taken the throne back for the Baratheon dynasty, but they could not. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you look at directly leading up to this, and obviously he found out that Robert's kids weren't his. He decided, all right, if I tell Robert this, he's not going to believe me. So he just goes to Dragonstone, abandons his post as master of ships, and he starts building up. And that separated him from court. That separated him from really being able to consolidate power at the right time. If he had been in King's Landing with, a decent retainer of men and with Ned, maybe something more positive could have happened. But even then, it's like Renly had more men. Renly did not get along with him. How many years has this festered into a problem?
So I had that written down somewhere else. I forget where, but same thing. He could have worked something out with Ned, who is not exactly the same as Stannis, but they're both stubbornly, addicted to enforcing the rules. They're both just in their way. Certainly, Stannis could have sent a letter to Ned as he began uncovering the mystery, or when Ned was in King's Landing, Stannis could have contacted him and formed some sort of partnership. Ned was trying to send a letter to Stannis. I don't think that one got off. Did it get off? I can't remember.
Yeah,
it did get off. Okay, yeah. So this he did because he was jealous of Ned. Bitterness. Again, he was bitter that Robert was closer to Ned than him, treated Ned like his brother instead of Stannis, and so he's always resented Ned, not for anything Ned did. He even says, I have nothing against Ned Stark, but it's like, well, yeah, but you're jealous of that relationship, and so you didn't see him as an ally. So again, I think Stannis' bitterness is sabotaging here.
It's very, female high school type dynamic there, where he's getting it his own way. He won't even talk to Ned, and yet that should have been his biggest ally because he's jelly.
I don't know that the silent treatment is gendered. I think you were trying to make a Mean Girls reference.
Mostly, yes.
But of course, the silent treatment is definitely a weapon of non-communicative a-holes of all persuasions. I hate the silent treatment. I'd rather have you yell at me. At least I know where you're coming from. But in any case, he is pouting. He's sulking, kind of like Maekar. Similar character, really. Maekar sulking at Summerhalls. Similar vibes.
Talked about that before.
Here is a little description of Stannis. His mouth would have given despair to even the drollest of fools. It was a mouth made for frowns and scowls and sharply worded commands, all thin, pale lips and clenched muscles, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile and had never known how to laugh. Sometimes when the world grew very still and silent of a night, Maester Crescent fancied he could hear Lord Stannis grinding his teeth half a castle away. So there's the infamous quote about that. And yeah, he's one of those people that, like, you give him a hug and you're like, dude, you're back. Why is it so tense? It's like an oak tree. You know what I mean? Like, you try to rub their shoulders and it's just like touching a rock. It's like, dude, how do you live like this?
I don't know. I do live like that, though.
I mean, there's like knots in your shoulders, and then there's just like locked. And Stannis is just, that's how I picture him, just locked. Everything just locked.
Right before, I'm, trying to figure out how to do my taxes, which I do every year and still have not figured out. But yeah, right. Well, that is going on. All knots, because it's just on top of the other knots that are there.
Stannis has the vibe like he's got an earpiece in one ear and he's on the phone with the power company for like 6 hours. And he's just like, what?
Yeah, he's upset, but he's too stubborn to hang up, even though they're never going to let him off hold.
Yeah, exactly. He's never hanging up. I'm going to get my $5 fee overturned. And I mentioned he's lacking in empathy and compassion. Again, he doesn't feel like he was shown any. His parents died cruelly in front of his eyes, drowning at sea when he was a child, and nothing has really ever been sweet since then. And we see this with the very painful scene where Crescent is humiliated and Stannis goes along with it. And we can see it from Crescent's point of view, how heartbreaking he is and how much love he has for the Baratheon kids, and it's just not returned by Stannis. So that's pretty tough. It shows you, like, Stannis is not... He just does not have compassion. You mentioned Davos's fingers. Mm-hmm. Davos's, look, well, let me just transfer into the justice topic so we can properly discuss this thing that I still have trouble with. I still have trouble with it. I really do. I have to say, like, cutting someone's fingers off is not, that's a cruel punishment. The guy just saved everyone in the castle. Like, it's absolutely insane to me. If I had been Davos and he had said that, I'd be like, you must be out of your goddamn mind.
I don't know how mobile you can be with, having those digits removed. Like, I don't know how much use those fingers are after you lose it at the first digit, but it's problematic for a lot of things, namely, like carrying a sword. Like, you're never going to have the same ability that way. But like, and he has to go into battle for Stannis after Stannis basically killed his ability to properly use a sword.
It's insane. And so what I think, I'm with you, Crypt Girl. Yeah, there's a very weird thing where he's like almost thankful to Stannis. Like, it's a kind of an abusive relationship. I'm not sure what to make of it.
Stockholm.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would say is that, like, it reminds me of the part of a myth where it's intentionally confusing and challenging to our norms and our consciousness. And it's sort of a technique of storytelling to sort of shock you a little bit. And it makes a point. So with Stannis, like, you can't but notice it and reflect. Why is this guy like this? Okay. And so I ruminated on this the last couple of days, and this is what I want to just throw at you primarily, Sean. So for Stannis, rules and order equate to stability. And remember, his parents died at sea. The stormy, chaotic ocean took his parents. All right. And what the other trauma that he has is that the rules were broken to take what is his by rights. So now he has to enforce the rules forever. Because if he doesn't enforce the rules rigidly, then he is participating in the same sin, which took away what was his by rights. So he basically equates mercy to misrule. bending the rules, making exceptions. This is the stuff of weakness and the stuff of corruption. And so to him, mercy, bending the rules, it equals a miscarriage of justice specifically. And so this is why he has to cut Davos's fingers off. It's like, well, you stole. You have to pay the penalty. I'll reward you for the good thing that you did, but it doesn't wash out the bad thing you did. So you've got to pay for that too. It's a very rigid idea of morality, almost robotic.
Not something you see in the real world. That's just not how it works in the real world. That kind of stuff almost never happens. You do something that saves somebody's life, they're not going to cut off your fingers.
And that's exactly what I mean by it's such an over-the-top nonsensical thing that it defines the character. Stannis is someone who is so robotic in his enforcement of the rules that it is essentially only explained as a result of trauma. And that's what I came up with. His response to the trauma of having everything taken from him, from his parents to his rightful seat at Storm's End to the Iron Throne, is to essentially enforce the rules as a means of stability, as a means of justice. This is what he equates to in his mind. Mm-hmm. But he's not principled. Principles are different. Principles, it doesn't have anything to do with rules. Principles means I believe something is wrong, so I'm going to stand against it no matter what it costs me. Brienne, standing up for the kids at the inn, no chance, no choice. She has no choice because she has honor and she has principle. And to run and abandon those kids would be to violate her principle, and she can't do that. That's a principled person. Dany, Jon, Davos, principled people. Brienne, those are always the names we mention. I wouldn't really say that Stannis is principled. He's addicted to following the rules. The only thing that he ever does that's principled is when he decides to go and help the Night's Watch. He had to be talked into that by Davos. Now, he does become a better king when he does that. Nevertheless, it is the right thing to do. But before that, he is not a principled character. He's ready to sacrifice Edric Storm. And he says, well, what's the life of one child against all the children I'm going to save? And Davos says everything. That everything is, are you going to be principled? That's what he's saying. He's like, if you abandon your principle, it's worthless for you to win. You're no better than the enemy. So, this is what Stannis figures out, or at least comes to realize, is what Davos is saying. And so he goes north, and he is now going to fight this fight against the others, even against overwhelming odds. I just find that to be an interesting pivot. And so related to this is his determination and stubbornness. It's the defining attribute of his house. But as I mentioned earlier, the Summer Kings are different. There's a different kind of stubbornness. So Robert is stubborn when it comes to people defying his will, and Renly too, in a way, because he's like, hey, I've got the superior forces. You're going to be my hand or my functionary. I'm the king, not you. So they're both stubborn in their way. But Stannis, again, he's stubborn with this enforcing of the rules. Robert doesn't have a problem breaking the rules or making exceptions, being fluid with that stuff. Because again, Robert is more hot running. He is associated with fury and rage, whereas Stannis is that cold resentment, cold implacability.
Yeah, and something that's kind of just in the archetype that Stannis is, you see kind of a similar stubbornness in Maekar. He does something uncharacteristic after being talked into it, and that's letting Egg go with Dunk. He's presented some interesting points. He really has to think. He still doesn't agree to it on the spot. He, walks off like he does stubbornly and then lets it happen. And that's kind of similar to how this happens. And it's actually kind of similar to how Ned does some things. And Ned, in the same vein, I think he's also very much, a lot of the ways that he goes about things is dictated by traumas in the same way, like his dad being burned alive with his brother strangled to death. That shaped the way that he's become stubborn in a number of things, definitely in a more human way than Stannis, but still kind of a similar stubbornness from him, maybe for similar reasons. And he also has the change his mind thing after, being presented. So he does uncharacteristic things like finding Arya a dancing master. He does it off page, and then she finds a dancing master in her room. So same thing.
There's a certain flexibility to Stannis in that he seeks out alternate ways to enforce the rules.
Right.
That's what it ends up being. It's like he's willing to use this power of Melisandre because it allows him to be stubborn and insist on his right. Because he has no business challenging Renly. Renly has 20 times the army. And look, Stannis is older. That doesn't mean shit. When you look at medieval history and the history of England and stuff like that, there's always several contestants for the throne. And if you have more support of more lords with more power, that means you have the better claim. Like, that's really what it comes down to. It's not about birthright. It's about who has the support of the most people and the most power. And Renly dwarfs Stannis. But Stannis has turned to this magic power. And so it gives him the ability to stiffen his back and be like, I'm older. I'm the king, not you. And you will see. That's what he wants to do, you know.
And it's something that happens with people who really don't recover from their trauma and really don't, work past it, is that in certain ways they're very immature. And it's pretty clear that both Stannis and Renly, young as they were when it happened, were pretty traumatized by it. And the way that they're fighting is like children. There's a lot of nuh-uh vibes from these two.
Definitely. It's kids fighting. It definitely is. And none of us have outgrown our trauma, least of all these people. And so the Siege of Storm's End is a great example of Stannis just like holding out. Other people would have capitulated. He's eating boot leather and stuff. He's just gonna stick it out until the end. That's the personality. So it's that cold resentment, determination, implacability. Now, it's when this aligns with the right cause that Stannis becomes a good king. And I think this is kind of the summation of why he transforms, because in the first couple books, there's nothing likable about Stannis at all. Nothing. But once he makes this transition and gets his priorities right, then all of a sudden his stubborn implacability is a good thing. He's determined to help Jon. He's determined to man the wall against the others. I mean, it's a grim task, Then he's going to march to Winterfell and make Ramsay submit and unify the North and then go back to the wall. Like, the determination level there is off the hook. And you need someone like Stannis almost to drive that. So now it becomes an asset that we appreciate because Davos has turned him in the right direction.
Yeah.
And that's why he's the one true king.
Well, and that's something that you kind of hope to see with the other Azor Ahai / Night's King archetypes, so that the way that they're mirroring of this kind of centralized archetype, the way that Azor Ahai's story is supposed to go, the way that the Night King's story is supposed to go, there is a good version of that. Like, where it's not a, stabbing your wife, it's an air quotes stabbing your wife, and it's procreative. And that's a lot better than murdering your wife. And then there's, the good version of all the things that the Night's King is doing. And black and white is not what we're going to get from George, other than like the Night's Watch versus the others. But it is going to take a hero with actual empathy. I mean, Stannis is like the Grim Reaper. You said he was a grim guy going about a grim task. He is. He's the Grim Reaper. The shape of the skull showing through underneath. Yeah. Right. So we need a more human version of that. We need the better version of that, and we hope it's Jon or Jon and Dany or somebody who like basically just exemplifies a better version of all these things. Doesn't have to sacrifice.
Someone who enforces the law with no mercy is kind of terrifying. Yeah. So so now that we've defined Stannis's character, let's take a look at the major decision points of his story so we can see this stuff in action. And we've already talked about Robert's kids a little bit. Apparently, Sherlock Stannis Baratheon and John Watson Aaron ferreted out the truth. They went on the detective. They figured it out. They went and saw Gendry, some of the other bastards, and they figured it out. And so they know that Jaime and Cersei are actually the parents of Cersei's kids and not Robert. And what does Stannis do about it? He decides to flee to Dragonstone. He either thinks that Robert wouldn't believe him and he needs to gather evidence, which is why he's interested in Edric Storm, because it kind of shows what Robert's kids should look like, But essentially, he ran away. And like I said, he didn't even get a hold of Ned once Ned got to King's Landing. So brave Sir Robin kind of ran away there on that one.
Brave, 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 brave Sir Robin.
And then we mentioned that the resentment against Ned for being Robert's best friend probably played a factor there. So we kind of covered that, but basically his stubbornness was self-sabotaging. And then after the Lannisters seized the throne, he did send out the smear letter, which was kind of a good move. It definitely started to undermine their power a little bit, but it's also kind of a day late and dollar short. So,
right.
And then he's clashing with Renly. Okay, so like I said, that has no real business challenging Renly. Without that sorcery, he would have to take Renly's offer. And that's why Renly's so confused. He's like, bro, I'll let you be like Hand of the King or something. I mean, you could be Lord of Storm's End, but like, what are you talking about? We're going to have a battle tomorrow. And he's like, yeah, tomorrow. He's like, okay.
It's a little one-sided.
I guess we'll slaughter your 5,000 men. And Renly's like, look, don't humiliate Stannis's body. Hector and Achilles style. He's like, treat it with respect. There's no fight to be had here save for the shadow baby. So,
no.
This does kind of mirror, Sean, historical situations where a candidate for king is killed or assassinated, killed in battle or assassinated, and their whole cause just kind of evaporates.
Right. And I mean, what are you going to do? Support the next in line? Like, if you lose a little support, it cascades. It's like an avalanche. The first few little bits of snow to fall cause the entire mountain to come down. So,
and Catelyn explains that. She's like, well, where are they all going to go? They don't know it yet, but they're basically Stannis's. There's nowhere else for them to turn.
Yeah. In another fun thing, so they're talking in the chat, Morgana was bringing up Agamemnon, who...
we're going to get to in a minute, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got him locked up. Not locked up, locked down, but like he's in the outline. I would love to hear what everyone has to say about it. So the attack on King's Landing was well planned, mostly. He made the mistake of giving leadership positions to some people based on politics and not competency. And Davos, had he been in command, seems like he would have sniffed out the trap a little sooner. He was doing a little backseat quarterback, backseat driving, armchair quarterbacking as it was happening. So it seems like that was the main mistake. But other than that, it basically would have worked, except for that Tyrion's plan was truly ingenious with the chain and the wildfire. He knew his Byzantine history. And so he did that. And so they lost. But it was still close. They almost made it over the bridge of ships and fought their way into King's Landing, even still. So that's what I had to say about that. Do you have any further thoughts about the attack on King's Landing from Stannis?
No, I just think it does a very good job of his archetype, with that being kind of a symbolic death for him. He comes back very gaunt, and it's also after his shadow babies. So he's missing some soul. He's very gaunt. He's all skin and bones. He's like the dead version of himself. That's where he transitions from Azor Ahai to Night's King.
Yeah, you're totally right. That is definitely that moment. So Stannis at the wall, Sean. Stannis at the wall. This is next. He handles a few things here. So the decision to go north, like we said, it's forced upon him. He really had no other choice. Davos talked him into it, but he also didn't have any other choice. Like, it's only a matter of time before they went and cleaned him off of Dragonstone. He could barely defend himself. However, he did have enough of an army to go and smite the wildlings, and so he did. And the strategic thing he did here was that he crossed over to the north side of the wall at Eastwatch so that he could sweep down onto the wildlings. He didn't go the safe way south of the wall and then go through the gate. He crossed over at Eastwatch and came out of nowhere and took him in the flank. So that was a good strategic move by Stannis.
Yeah, and we see right there just how valuable, Westerosi weapons, armor, really horses more than anything else. It's not like Stannis had a huge cavalry contingent relative to other armies on the continent, but compared to the wildlings, who have next to none, I guess just Harmadog's Head's little group there. But again, like Harmadog's Head's people do not have castle forged steel like the knights do for armor or for weapons. Their horses are certainly not armored. So it got very brutal very fast.
It was like it was almost like a time portal opened up as far as like medieval knights warring on like some Bronze Age warriors. It's just not a fair fight at all. It's even worse than the Andals versus the First Men. It's like an exaggerated version of that because it's Andal technology 4,000 years later or whatever it is, 2,000, whatever.
Right.
So,
well, and the analogy I give is it's one-sided in the same way that the Fist of the First Men was one-sided.
Yeah, that was one-sided. And so then once Stannis is at the wall, he then does a pretty good job of sorting out the Night's Watch and identifying Jon as the most competent person. He gets those other castles fortified. So he's improving the quality of the Night's Watch dramatically and suddenly. So that's cool. He doesn't seem to have prejudice against Jon for being a skin changer because Stannis is basically taking a utilitarian approach to religion. They're just different hawks to try for hunting, right?
Yeah. I've definitely thought that he was maybe autistic coded, just in his very, he's methodical, but he's not considering other angles when he does stuff. He's very... Yeah, just, my cousin's autistic, and I spent a bunch of years trying to get him to focus on like things like homework and stuff like that. And anyway, it's just, I very much get that impression from Stannis, except that my cousin is a very happy guy and Stannis is not.
Hopefully your cousin hasn't chopped anyone's fingers off.
No, not
Crypt
that
Girl agrees with you. Interesting.
Right. Yeah.
It's a little out of my field of expertise, but obviously all these kinds of interpretations are always, interesting. The whole point of characters in stories is for us to relate to them. So that's interesting. He's definitely rigid adherence to the rules. Yeah, that's something that what I do know about ASD, that's something that I had associated with it. So yeah, I guess the chat's agreeing with you. Okay, so Stannis then... His offer to make Jon a Stark was strategically smart, but it betrayed a cultural ignorance of the North because, of course, it came along with the demand of ripping up the Heart Tree, which would have invalidated Jon's right to rule the North.
Yeah.
So not only was Jon not okay with that, nobody else in the whole North would have been okay with that. So that was Stannis. His strategy there was compromised by his fealty to Melisandre's, religious fanaticism, I guess you'd say.
Right. He's just missing context. Yeah. It's he's thinking of the problem very utilitarian, but very one-dimensionally. Like, oh yeah, the North will support a Stark. Here's a Stark.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But you can't rip up the Heart Tree, bro.
No.
So he's mostly doing a pretty good job. And similarly with the wildlings, he's sorting them out pretty well. He's identifying certain ones to work with. He decapitated their leadership by burning Mance Rayder, or at least co-opting Mance Rayder and sending him on a task, which was actually even smarter, making use of the resource, but making everyone think that he had decapitated the leadership. So then he's identifying different wildlings that he can work with. He's doing a good job at that. You could argue that Stannis doesn't quite understand that the wildlings don't share the concept of nobility that the Southrons do. However, I would argue that the wildlings need to acclimate to that if they're going to integrate with the South. And we see that with Sigorn of Thenn. He's the easiest because the Thens have a concept of kingship, but he's also setting an example for the other wildlings to follow and showing the path forward.
Yeah, the place where he hit on that, and that actually helped a lot. The place where he really missed on that was with Val, like really thinking that Val is a legitimate princess when even she does not view it that way.
Well, but see, I disagree. I think that if his people treated her like one, and so he's using her as a prize to offer to his men, right? Like, so if he gives somebody the permission to marry Val, they will take it as an honor. He was using that as part of a chit to get Jon to take the offer. That was part of it. Like, you can be Jon Stark, Val will be your wife. So whether she's a princess or not, she's a high status woman. And in that sense, he's right. And I also think that, again, the wildlings have to start fitting into the shape of Westerosi if they're going to be accepted by the Westerosi. And Val is the kind of person that could be a strong woman of a house. It just takes someone that's strong enough that she actually respects them. That's the thing with Val, is that she doesn't have respect for the Queen's men knights and stuff. Like Jon could have earned her respect and probably already has to some extent. But yeah.
The thing that he would be missing on is that Jon didn't, steal her, right? So it's, are the wildlings going to respect that relationship if they set up a marriage? Because like Sigorn of Then taking Alyce Karstark as his wife, that feels a lot more like the wildlings are okay with it than like tossing a woman to some Southron lord. I think I could be wrong about that, but it feels a little bit weird and different.
I think I'm making the point that with Stannis's objective and from his point of view, he is trying to integrate the wildlings to the north. Val is functionally a princess. I'm arguing that she essentially is. She is a high status woman. She is intelligent. She is beautiful, which means that she'll be respected by men and seen as a high status. She also has knowledge of lore and witchcraft and things like that. So you can see that other wildlings listen to her and respect her. So yeah, high status woman, I say. In that sense, he's correct. Now,
I'll agree on that point. Yeah.
That's not to guarantee everything's going to go perfectly. Integrating the wildlings to Westeros is kind of a tall task. But if you're trying to do that, I'm saying that he's done a pretty good job of identifying which wildlings he could potentially work with. So this is something we'll continue to see play out. Even if Stannis dies, Jon has died, but they've set this thing in motion now. So this is pretty interesting stuff. The culture integration. And then the march on Winterfell. So here's where Agamemnon's going to come up because this is the real parallel to it. So his original plan was poor. And Jon basically saved his ass by saying, no, don't do that. Don't do that or that. What you need to do is go and recruit the mountain clans on your side, and they will help you. And then you need to not go to the Dreadfort, I think is what he wanted to do, but go to Winterfell. So Stannis was going to doom himself here. He had the right idea, but he didn't have the plan. And this is kind of the thing about stubbornly doing the right thing. It's good to do the right thing, but it's also good to have a plan. It's also good to have strategy and patience. And someone like Stannis is kind of wooden and two-dimensional in his understanding of this. So it's like, well, I've got to go consolidate power in the north to stand behind the wall, and Ramsay is a usurper, so I'm going to go kill him.
Right. Although we did get, and it's still wild that he was able to convince the mountain clans. They just wanted to fight Boltons, so they were an easy sell. But we got some of the greatest lines in the series from like Big Bucket Wool and them talking about murdering Boltons. That was great stuff.
Turns out they're all about it. Absolutely. And so this is where the Agamemnon parallel comes in. Okay, so Agamemnon, the whole thing is that he is a king of which Greek city? His brother Menelaus is the king of Troy. Agamemnon is the king of what, Athens?
Oh, he was king of... okay, that's actually kind of an interesting part. He was the king of Mycenae, which it did become a Greek city-state, but when they discuss the Iliad and the Odyssey, they have it take place in a certain year before Greek mythology was a thing. So it was when Mycenaean mythology was the dominant mythology in that area. So he's the king of Mycenae or Mycenae, or, depending on which language you're speaking, how you pronounce it. And
so they are getting ready to go and sail the big Greek fleet over to attack Troy and get Helen back. There's this story about Agamemnon hunted a stag in Athena's royal wood, correct? And he offended the goddess. It's Athena, right? Oh, Artemis. Oh, it is Artemis. It is.
Right. Yeah. That makes more sense. She has...
Because she's the hunting goddess. It's her wood. So Agamemnon hunts without permission, essentially. And so Artemis becomes the weather. And so the Greek fleet cannot set sail. And she must be appeased. And to appease her, they want to sacrifice Agamemnon's daughter. What's her name? Iphigenia? Iphigenia. Okay. And so she is essentially very Nissa-Nissa-like. And there's a poem that really encapsulates this. So let me just pull this up real quick.
Yeah. Well, and it's referenced in the Iliad. It's referenced with his son Orestes kind of avenging him by killing his own mother, Clytemnestra. It's messy. No, that's what this is from. It's called the Oresteia after Orestes, his son. That's the name of the story with Iphigenia getting sacrificed.
So would you go ahead and read this then? This is Euripides' description of Agamemnon being willing to sacrifice his daughter in order to appease the goddess Artemis so that their fleet can set sail. Their fleet is stuck. So just like Stannis' troops are stuck in the snow, and they end up sacrificing not Stannis' daughter this time, but they sacrifice people to R'hllor in order to try to change the weather so that the army can move again. So that's an obvious parallel to their army being becalmed here. But the way that they describe the sacrifice begins to really make us think of Nissa Nissa.
We brought your child to the place where the Greek army has gathered, all together and all at once. When King Agamemnon saw his daughter proceeding to the altar to her death, he heaved a deep sigh and turned his head to one side and wept. He covered his eyes with his robe, but the young girl stood beside her father who had given her life and said, "Fathers, as you bid me, I am here. I give my body freely on behalf of my country for all the land of Greece. Lead me to the altar. There, if that is the gods' will, sacrifice me. May this gift from me bring you success. May you win the crown of victory and win thereafter a glorious homecoming. And no, do not let any man lay his hands upon me. In peace and in good heart I offer you my throat." So she spoke, and all stood in wonder at the courage, yes, the virtue of her words. Then Talthybius, for so he was commanded, stood before the assembled army and ordered them to watch and keep holy silence. The Calchas, the prophet, took from its sheath a sharp knife and put it in a basket studded with gold, and upon the young girl's head he put a garland. Achilles, son of Peleus, circled the altar of the goddess, basket in hand, and upon her he sprinkled holy water, and he said, "Artemis, daughter of Zeus, slayer of wild beasts, you that spin the silver light at night, receive this sacrifice which we offer to you. We, the Greek army and King Agamemnon, offer to you the pure blood that flows from a virgin's throat. Grant our ships an untroubled journey. Grant that our spears will sack the towers of Troy." The priest seized the knife and offered a prayer as he looked for a place to plunge the knife's point. My soul was deeply troubled and in pain. I stood by, head lowered. Suddenly, it was a miracle. Everyone had heard the sound of the knife, but no one could see where in the world the young maiden had disappeared to. The priest cried out. The army echoed his cry. And then they saw the miracle, impossible to believe even as it happened before their eyes. There on the ground lay a deer, gasping for breath. She was a full-grown deer, beautiful. Oh, I lost my place.
Sorry, I'll pick it up just to give you a break. I meant to cut in a little bit. A full-grown deer, beautiful, on the altar of the goddess was dripping with her blood. Then Calchas spoke. Imagine the joy. Leaders of this Greek army, do you see this victim that the goddess has laid upon her own altar, this mountain deer? She accepts this offering with greater gladness than the child, for her altar will now not be stained with noble blood. She rejoices in the sacrifice, and she grants us fair sailing and success at Troy. Therefore, courage, to arms, to the ships, for on this day we must leave the hollow bay of Aeolus someplace, and cross the Aegean Sea. When the carcass had been reduced to ashes in Hephaestus' fire, Calchas offered a prayer for the safe homecoming of the army. Agamemnon sent me to tell you these things, to tell you of the good fortune he has received from the gods. So there is no doubt your child was taken to live amongst the gods. And so basically Artemis had substituted the deer. This is not going to go, it's not going to, so there is another version of this story where she is sacrificed, and it's not the merciful sparing of the child. And really it's almost like she willingly said, "Oh, go ahead, father, I give myself to," it's very Nissa Nissa. It's like, oh yeah, Nissa Nissa bared her breast and said, "Yeah, go ahead and just run me through with the sword. It's for the best." It's not believable. Like, we're not. So when George wrote the Nissa Nissa legend, like, he's probably directly inspired by this passage right here when he writes about her goodness and how she sacrificed herself. And we're supposed to look at it and be like, I wonder if that's how it happened, you know?
I think he's influenced by the fact that there were two very different versions too.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to say, yeah. In any case, that's a little glimpse on both this parallel for Stannis, So obviously Shireen wasn't sacrificed to get his army unstuck, but a R'hllorist sacrifice was made to do that. And Shireen may well be sacrificed either to resurrect Jon, but also potentially if the others start coming and putting pressure on the wall, that could be another thing that could cause Mel and Selyse to do this. Starting with talking about the future now and predictions for his ending. One thing that I'm always kind of surprised that people think Stannis is going to get back to the wall in time to sacrifice Shireen. There's no way. He's too far. What's going to happen is that Melisandre and Selyse are going to sacrifice her. Yeah. Stannis will still be responsible, but what it means is that Stannis can't die until he learns what the fruit of him taking up with Melisandre turned out to be, which is the sacrifice of Shireen. So I do think that Stannis, and I want to see what your opinion is, chat, and you, Sean, but I think that he's got to live long enough to come to grips with the fact that Shireen has been sacrificed. And I even think this could be why he takes the black. I think that he would feel dishonored by this and grief-stricken and dismayed, like, oh, what have I done? What did you guys do? Because I think this will be a bridge too far for him. I don't think he'll be down with it. I think we've seen that Selyse is a true believer and a fanatic, where Stannis is not. He's utilitarian, like we said. So I don't think he would sacrifice Shireen. I had a big problem with it when we saw it on the show. I was like, Stannis wouldn't do that. But his decision-making is going to be responsible for it. So he set it into motion and will have to take accountability for it. I just think this may lead to him taking off his crown. And this is how it might be join the Watch, which is a popular theory, that he'll join the Watch, maybe even become commander of the Watch, which would fit the symbolism. But this is the shame and the sin that could motivate him to do that. So what do you think?
So as far as what he does after the fact, I haven't put a ton of thought into that. He definitely has the symbolism of leading the Watch. No, he's not going to sacrifice Shireen. I mean, I think what we get into is, as we're approaching another long night, events get confused and things are conflated. So like, they say that Stannis did it because, yes, he's involved with Melisandre. He is responsible for events that led up to it, kind of like you're saying. And not that he benefited from it, but he wins his big battle at Winterfell as his daughter is getting sacrificed. And they think, oh, he sacrificed his daughter to win at Winterfell. And
you're right. If it could be recorded like that.
That's kind of just how I see it happening, because that's what we get a lot of confused events when we look at history in ways that are kind of hard to believe. So I see it getting confused in a lot of ways. We've already seen events get fairly confused when they start making the rounds through peasants, when they start making the rounds through other people who weren't there, etc., like with the ghost of Renly. So that's kind of what I think it'll happen. It'll be very confused, but no, he's not going to sacrifice his daughter. Melisandre will do it.
Val will do it.
What?
Val's all about it.
Yeah, they just want her dead. Burn the witch. But yeah, I think they have no problem doing it, and I think they do it to resurrect Jon.
Yeah, I think if Melisandre tells Selyse that he's Azor Ahai, that it's got to happen, or that it's got to happen, then maybe she'll be down. But I also think that the others threatening could lead to it as well. It could happen more accidentally too. Like, could be a chaotic situation there. Because again, Val would love to toss her into the fire. Do you think there's any chance that Shireen is like willing to be sacrificed somehow? Like the poem here? I don't think so, right?
I tend not to think so. That sounds terrifying for a little kid. And she's got some like weird old soul vibes and stuff, but I think that's a little bridge too far. I am, however...
Yeah, she's scared by the dream of the dragons coming to eat her, right?
Right. What I am picturing is Val running her section with the Olympic torch, running to it to make sure that she... Yeah.
She's like, yeah, I'll take that leg. I will.
She's a witch. May we burn her?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of witches running around here. And so we kind of know, just skipping the obvious in case you haven't heard, like Dave and Dan said that some version of this came from George. So we know that some version of Shireen's sacrifice will happen in the books. Like I said, It's got to happen at the wall, though. It seems like it'll be happening well before Stannis can get back to the wall, because it's a snowstorm. Like, he's probably not going to march right back to the wall either. His troops need to rest and get fed, and they need to solidify their hold of Winterfell. We don't know what alliances he's going to be making then. So it might be a minute before he can get back to the wall.
Well, and it just seems so hokey on the show, and it's like, oh yeah, no, we're killing her because weather, like Agamemnon, it's fine. But and then it didn't really fix the weather. They were still in the middle of a storm, and like it just seems like it comes from Dave and Dan not really understanding or giving a shit about how magic works in the series.
Yeah, and they didn't make the storm bad enough for anyone to really appreciate, like, everyone's about to die and starve in the cold and they're desperate, like in the books you kind of get that more.
We lost some horses because Ramsay Bolton had 20 good men, which is apparently the, Achilles heel of every single group in the entire series.
Yeah, the 20 good men plot ruined that because it was supposed to be 20 feet snows that nobody can move through. But they just ran out and ran back. So yeah, it's dumb. All right, well, so the next question is, how will Jon react when he learns of Shireen's sacrifice, if in fact that is what brought him back? And also, how would he just react in general to learn that that's what's happened? How will he treat Melisandre? And then how would he treat, Stannis? How would that affect his relationship with Stannis?
I think this is another place where we're going to see egg parallels. Jon has a fair amount of egg parallels. And I see this as basically like when Egg became king and he banished Bloodraven.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think it could be something that Jon punishes. Absolutely. And I think that Stannis, like I said, may even just feel shamed by it and feel like he's lost the worthiness to be king. So Noble 1997 asked about Stannis's death and was pointing out, as a Holly King, he can't really live through the long night.
Right.
So I mostly think that he just has to live long enough to make it back to the wall and take accountability for what has happened to his family.
Yeah, I mean, I see it happening on kind of similar lines to what you were talking about earlier with Orys Baratheon, kind of a shell of himself, just, I did it. I got Winterfell. I'm a real king, blah, blah, blah. And then everything turns and he dies.
So he may die when he makes it back to the wall. I mean, maybe he'll hear about the death of Shireen and take his own life or something crazy like that. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like the type.
But yeah, I definitely see the progression is of, I finally did it. I'm a real king. Oh, I have no heir.
To me, Stannis would march on the wall to chastise Melisandre or something. I don't know. I'm not.
And Selyse, yeah.
He would definitely want to go sort it out. The other question was, how will everyone handle the idea if they realize that Jon is Azor Ahai reborn and not Stannis?
This is going to be so messy. Hey, just kidding. This entire time I said it was Stannis.
Oops. Sorry, you're not the one. You are not the father.
It's going to be so bad. I don't see how anyone continues to follow, but it won't really matter because I kind of suspect Melisandre will be banished in the same way that Bloodraven was banished. And in the same way it was hokey, but it did happen in the show.
I could see something like that happening. I don't know that Melisandre and Jon need to be friends after he's resurrected. It seems like it's mostly set up for her to help resurrect him or free his body from others' possession. That could happen at Winterfell, too. If Jon's body's stolen by the others and they invade Westeros, Stannis could be at Winterfell when Jon shows up with the others. So maybe that's how Stannis will die.
Yeah, when it comes to trying to figure out the specifics of these things, I'm always trying to double check and confirm these things with symbolism. The Winterfell and the Wall's symbolism are so similar that it's basically indistinguishable in terms of trying to figure out future events. So
right, yeah, it could happen at either place. But I do feel like if the theory that Jon's body is going to be stolen by the others is right, which it may or may not be right, the purpose would be to invade Westeros. Jon will help them cross the wall. And so it seems like Winterfell will be the place where he might be freed from enchantment. So that's where we could see Melisandre's final hurrah, and that's where we could see Stannis and Melisandre come to grips with the realization of who Jon is.
You don't think they'll transport him all the way to King's Landing, have him flail around a little bit for Cersei, and then
put Jon in a box? I don't want to go in the box. So Morse code food brings up the Nightfort. So one interesting tidbit from the 2004 A Feast for Crows draft, which at that time was combining the timelines. There's a modified version of this exchange about the Nightfort between Stannis and Jon, where Jon's like, we gave you the Nightfort, and Stannis is like, yeah, pretty And Jon says, look, I warned you, Deep Lake could be made ready for you in a third of the time. And Melisandre says, it must be the Nightfort. Even in ruins, the Nightfort is the heart of your wall. So that line about it being the heart of the wall is not in the finished version. But I do think that that is true, of course. This would seem to strengthen my idea that the Nightfort predates the wall, and it's kind of the origin of this whole thing. It's where Knights King and Queen did their thing. And so this just really shines a light on how important it is that Mel and Stannis have taken it there. Like, there may be some magic if they actually get to the Nightfort, which obviously Stannis went south. So we don't know if Stannis will ever get to the Nightfort, but Melisandre at the Nightfort could be interesting. You could see some magical fireworks go off if that happens. So what do you think could happen if Melisandre gets to the Nightfort?
I think at a certain point we're going to have to get Bran back. We don't know where he's going to come from. You've talked about the theory where he's going in the underground river, and he is, but all roads lead to the Nightfort, typically. Like, Castle Black is a much newer castle. It's not as important. So having Bran and Melisandre in the same place, that is an interesting idea.
It is, because Melisandre saw Bran in her vision and thinks that was the enemy. And she is tearing up weirwoods at Storm's End and wanted to tear the weirwood up at Winterfell. But if she understands that the Nightfort is the heart of the wall and gets there and sees that the heart of the Nightfort is a weirwood organism, is she going to start changing her? Is she going to start understanding what the actual role of the weirwoods is? Or is Melisandre right? Is tearing up the weirwoods preventing the others from using them to teleport into Westeros and shit? Like, I'm very curious to see what Melisandre makes of the Nightfort weirwood, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and at some point, the Winterfell weirwood, because we're going to see her again. She's basically dead already, so I can't imagine she'd be easy to kill. So I don't think they're going to execute her for what happens with Shireen. So we will see her again. And who knows what she'll be doing. It won't be as stupid as lighting Dothraki Arrax on fire and then, just kind of prancing around, making, glib comments. But it will be more interesting because George has developed the magic a lot more in the series than they did on the show. And she is really the most outwardly magical person. Like, she may not be the most purely powerful if you're talking about...
No, yeah, definitely.
But yeah.
My wildest prediction for Melisandre is that when she walks into the pyre to resurrect Jon, she will actually give up her physical body and finish her transformation into a full fire other, the fire equivalent of an other. And that it'll be kind of like an Obi-Wan thing where she might be able to materialize and talk to people psychically, but she's not totally there. So it could be something weird like that. But yeah,
I can see it.
I'm curious if she gets to the Nightfort and understands that the wall is powered by the weirwoods, would she change her mind and then not want to tear out the weirwood, because that would be akin to undoing the spell that keeps the others out? So she could have a bit of a theological crisis, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly what to make of that. But I do think that when we get the resurrection of Jon with Melisandre, it's going to be like a birthing. It's we see this again. We see Beric playing the Azor Ahai role with his fiery sword. He gives his seed of life, or whatever you want to call it, to Lady Stoneheart. And at some point, I think very soon, what is going to happen is she's going to pass it on, I think, to Jaime in order to kind of resurrect him so that he can be kind of a poor man's Night King. And then we've seen it with, Stannis also being crappy Azor Ahai, giving his, seed of life or soul or whatever to Melisandre. And then whatever happens with Jon, it is like a rebirth when he's being resurrected. So the birthing, language, symbolism, all of that will be coming from her. And you got to wonder, does that, come with a symbolic death where she is fundamentally changed? And the Fire Other theory could explain a lot of that.
And the theory basically is just that, like, when we see her practicing fire magic, we can see that it is burning and searing and transforming her as she uses it, which gives us the idea that her gradual conversion into a being that is powered by fire, who doesn't need to eat, the transformation goes further every time she uses the magic, like a guild navigator using spice or whatever.
Right.
And so this act of resurrecting Jon it's going to be the greatest magic she's ever done. So it could be that she would finish her transformation by completing the act itself. That's the theory. So,
yeah, and I'm curious to know what that looks like, because it's not going to be all positive. Like, it's whatever she ends up as, like fire other, she's gaining a lot, so she will sacrifice a lot, and it will be brutal and macabre in the way that George always makes these things.
It's going to be a gnarly ass scene, and it's going to parallel Drogo's pyre, essentially, where she'll be playing the role of Dany, walking into the pyre, Shireen as Mary Mazdur tied to the pyre, Ghost as the dead horse on the pyre, and Jon as Drogo. So I made a video about that, Jon Snow's pyre, if you want more.
I agree. In the Corn Half Hand doing the same thing. Like, there are a few parallels to it. It's all very good.
So Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Dre, asks about could it happen? And then accompanying question, Stannis being resurrected. Could he be a resurrected Lord Commander of the Night's Watch? Could we see him killed and resurrected? What do you think about the resurrection?
I don't think so. I think that's not an arc George would write, because he already wrote him symbolically getting killed. So, and that was his conversion from Azor Ahai to Night's King. When the Night's King dies, the Night's King is dead. When Azor Ahai dies, he gets resurrected. So, all of a sudden, Melisandre is seeing in her flames only snow. Like, every time she looks for Azor Ahai, Jon is Azor Ahai. He gets killed. He comes back as Night's King. So I don't think the arc has room for him to be resurrected.
I tend to agree with you. The only caveat I would put on that is, does George want to give Jon a Fire Night's Watch? Do we need a whole bunch of Fire White Night's Watchmen who can all light their swords on fire? If so, and we're looking for people to become that, Stannis could be one. But then him being resurrected would be less about Stannis and more about him joining, not a hive mind, but like a group where you put your own desires aside and serve the greater purpose. Like, you're becoming undead to help the Night's Watch fight the others. Like, that could make sense as an atonement penance thing after the Shireen thing. It's similar to him joining the Watch. Go ahead.
A reverse cold hands.
Yes. Hot hands.
Yeah. And,
hot hands. And then the other questions that we didn't answer, Pink Letter. Quinn the GM has a new theory, not only that Stannis wrote the Pink Letter with Theon's help, which to me is the only other possibility besides Ramsay actually wrote it. I think Ramsay wrote it. And I think that the trick about it is that Ramsay himself is deceived. And some of the things he's writing in the letter are wrong because Stannis has tricked Ramsay into thinking that he is dead. That is what I have always thought, but I've never been sure. I'm open to different ideas. Quinn the GM is suggesting that Stannis wrote it with Theon, which makes sense because Theon knows how Ramsay talks and could help him compose it in that way where it sounds like Ramsay. And that he was saying, and I'm summarizing a longer theory, so go check out his video. I'm not going to be able to do it justice by summarizing it quickly, but it boils down to Stannis and Mel having had a plan for Mel to make a shadow baby with Jon and send the shadow baby to Winterfell. Because it is Jon Snow, the blood of the Starks, the shadow baby might be able to breach the wards that would keep it out at Storm's End. And this is how Stannis was planning to get into Winterfell. The main problem I have with that is that I don't know how Stannis could have coordinated that with Mel, because they haven't talked in a long time. And the plan that Stannis is making to fake his own death and all that is based on new information that he has learned since he left the Wall. So I don't know how we could communicate that with Mel.
I think it also trips up a little bit when we kind of look at the dynamic of what's going on in Winterfell right now, just because how recently did Roose Bolton leave and how would they know in the middle of a storm where they can't even send ravens through the storm?
Right. It requires a lot of pre-planning. And the other problem is that Jon is dead, so they can't do it now. So the whole theory is kind of like they had this plan to do something, but now they can't do it. So I'm unclear about what effect that would have on the story, since they can't now go back and do it because Jon's dead. And presumably you can't make a shadow baby with a resurrected person. It seems like their life fires would be lower. But maybe it's the opposite. Maybe a fire white can make a bunch of shadow babies. We don't know. So I do like Quinn the GM quite a bit. So check out his video for, like I said, the full explanation on the theory. But that is the newest theory I had heard about the pink letter, so I wanted to mention it.
Okay.
I tend to think, like I said, that Ramsay has been tricked into thinking Stannis has died, and that is why he's writing that in the letter. I do not know about Mance being in the cage. Some of that could be exaggeration by Ramsay to provoke a response too. So there could be a mix of Ramsay's lies, Ramsay's deceptions, and then Ramsay trying to provoke Jon.
Right. It could also just be overconfidence that he thinks Stannis is going to be dead soon. Stannis's army is, stuck out. He's got the Frey's army.
Remember, the letter says, I have his magic sword. So I think that's how he was able to convince, presumably the plan is like the Manderleys are going to come out and turn on the Freys. And then Stannis and the Manderleys are going to take some of those Frey costumes and dress up Stannis's men as Freys. And they're going to lead him back in. And the Manderley will have the sword. It'll be like, we killed Stannis, we've got his sword. And that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that part with the sword is Ramsay being full of it. Just because, like, if he had actually found the sword, Salador San, that is a burnt sword. That is not a burning sword. It is a burnt sword. There's nothing magic about it at this point. It was wild.
I think that Ramsay has never believed it was real. He's probably thinking that Stannis is running around with a parlor trick, and that's why he's like, I've got his magic sword. You usually don't separate somebody from their sword. So if the Manderleys come back with Stannis' sword, it's pretty good evidence that they killed him. Mm-hmm. Because how else did they get it? So I think it does make sense as part of the deception. And Stannis isn't really attached to it because it's just a fucking sword.
Yeah, and he probably has to change those out because it genuinely damages the sword.
He's got a trunk with like 12 of them in there.
Yeah. Oh, 12, huh?
They're like Batman's closet,
He's just handing them out to his 12 disciples or the last hero's companions or whatever.
So I tend to think that Ramsay wrote the letter and that is what's going on. But yeah, it's always interesting to see. And I do think that's the one other main possibility is that Stannis and Theon together could write it.
I'm willing to listen to the conspiracy. I try to avoid tinfoil, but I'm definitely guilty of tinfoil myself. So it's I'm willing to hear it. I'm willing to get conspiratorial.
And then Stannis' ultimate fate, like we've talked about a few different things. I think that he will be basically destroyed by learning that Shireen has been sacrificed. So I see some final act of let me die with the sword in my hands, that's why I say joining the Watch, maybe ceasing his run for the crown. It should really break him, in my opinion.
Well, because
it's like they're just taking one more thing, and I'm sorry to stop and then start again, but it's just like they're taking one more thing from him,
Yeah. And he has no line. Why is he becoming king? Right.
Right.
So
yeah, there's also that.
Yeah. I think, he dies a warrior. The Night's Watch commander theory is not a bad one. It picks up a lot of the plot threads, but yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. I tend to think he'll die with the sword in his hand because that's how most of the Night's Kings go out.
Yeah, I don't know about commanding the Watch, but joining the Watch for the last battle, that I could see. I do think he will survive to get back to the Wall. Maybe he just goes to the Nightfort and sits there and broods.
Oh, God. Yeah, grinds his teeth.
It's the opposite of Summerhall, Nightfort. So, it, parallels Maekar.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember something I wanted to say about the Azor Ahai thing. So we see some Azor Ahai people that are grasping and ambitious from the start, okay? Like Euron, or like Rhaegar even, who tries to have it all. Stannis is not like that. He is seeking power because he was denied. So there is this other version of the Azor Ahai character that's like the disinherited sort of resentful guy. And Jon qualifies as this. He's disinherited from his Targaryen legacy, and he's labeled a bastard, and then he joins the Watch, so he can't have kids. And he's eventually going to seek power to like deal with this heavy sort of threat and like make this comeback. The other Azor Ahai figures, they reach at the beginning and then fall because of their arrogance.
Yeah.
And that's more like Robert or Renly.
And it's a classic, you know, trying to steal the power or the fire of the gods type thing. We see Bran do it. We see a lot of people trying to, you know, in metaphorical sense, climb to the top of that power, steal the power of the gods, and fall.
Right. But they do steal the fire, and the person that has it stolen from, they then seek power after they've lost it. And so that's the Stannis part. Is like he is this ex-Green Man. He's been everything stolen from him, and so now he's seeking out this dark power to make a comeback. And that's Jon's going to be resurrected by a dark power. He might be stolen by the others. He's going to be a Wolfman and a Firewhite, and like so. Yeah, he's staging a comeback after being disinherited, kind of. So it's a different arc, and these sort of snapped into place today as I was thinking about this. So
Dany too.
Who's that?
Dany too.
Yes, right. She's not ambitious at first at all. She's disinherited and down on her luck and is setting up to make this huge comeback. So whereas Viserys, ambitious at the beginning, overreaching, arrogant, and gets humiliated.
Well, you got to wonder if they are two different people, if they're really playing the same, Because, I mean, we do get Azor Ahai and Night's King stuff from Viserys. It's not out of nowhere. And he dies
definitely. Cart King, like the ice wagon, yeah.
Well, and Stannis, you know, will, like his whole thing, he wins at Winterfell. It's like, hey, I'm a real king, blah, blah. Viserys dies with the golden crown. So it's like they accomplish it, kind of.
Sure.
And it does not turn out the way they wanted.
Exactly.
Becoming the Night's King, sacrificing for great power, never really goes great. Although I think just George with his tendency towards heroes being self-sacrificial, the ones who do it that way, the end result will be better for them.
Yeah, and that's probably a third character arc is like the hero that voluntarily sticks his neck out there, because that's not either of those two archetypes that we just talked about. And Stannis he does have ambition, but it's in response. It's not the first part of his story. You know, it's something he turns to after other things fail.
Right.
And I think that mostly tracks to the others, you know, the dispossessed green men and the, you know, Night's Queen as a child of the forest. It's like, what do? Our weirwoods are being invaded and defiled. We got to strike back. So we've given these spirits bodies. We've turned them into the others, and now they're a weapon. That's kind of the vibes here. So
yeah, works pretty well for Mance Rayder too.
Yep, absolutely.
Who they sent to go, you know, raid the Starks. Mance.
I love Mance Rayder. He's such salt of the earth, dude.
Yeah, one of the best characters.
Sean, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem.
We'll see how it turns out on the edit, but thank you again, Sean, and thank you, chat. All right, y'all. Cheers. Have a good one.